Welcome back, my friends. Settle in and enjoy the stories. Nothing here will wake you. Sleep well. At 6:18 that evening, the flood sensor in Burrow Wash recorded a wall of water moving uphill. The sky above Capitol Reef was clear. The nearest storm sat outside the drainage, and the canyon had been dry for 9 days. Then a rescue beacon began transmitting from a side slot closed after a fatal flood 11 years earlier. Its serial number belonged to Ranger Aaron Pike, although Pike's beacon was locked in our evidence cabinet. When my partner and I reached the slot, fresh boot prints were coming out of solid sandstone. A second set ran beside them. They matched the boots I was wearing. The day had begun with a broken toilet at the Fruta campground and a mule deer tangled in irrigation wire. I mention that because people tend to imagine park rangers spending every shift on cliff rescues or chasing armed poachers through moonlit canyons. Most of the job is ordinary maintenance performed in extraordinary scenery. You answer questions about road conditions. You replace faded closure signs. You explain to visitors that a desert wash can kill them, even when there is blue sky directly overhead. Then, every so often, the landscape does something that makes all the ordinary training feel like a story you were telling yourself. My name is Daniel Mercer. I had worked at Capitol Reef for 12 years by then, first as a seasonal ranger, and later as the district's technical rescue coordinator. Before the Park Service, I studied watershed science at Utah State. That did not make me a hydrologist, but it made me the person our staff called when a drainage behaved strangely, or when a visitor insisted a flash flood had come from nowhere. Floods never come from nowhere. They come from rain you did not see, from slick rock that cannot absorb it, from narrow channels that collect miles of runoff and squeeze it into one moving wall. The danger feels sudden only because the causes are hidden beyond your line of sight. Burrow Wash cuts through the water pocket fold south of the main developed area. Most days it is a corridor of pale sand, rounded stones, and sculpted sandstone narrowing into slots where a person can touch both walls. During monsoon season, that beauty becomes plumbing. A storm over the fold can send water through the narrows before the first cloud reaches the trailhead. We teach visitors to watch the sky, but we also teach them to read mudlines, debris caught above head height, and the small changes in sound that arrive before the water does. The sensor had been installed as part of a joint debris flow study after a series of heavy summers. It was a temporary pressure transducer fixed inside a protected steel housing near the lower wash. When water covered the probe, pressure changed. A second station farther up the drainage provided direction and speed. If the upper station triggered first, water was moving down as gravity required. If the lower station triggered first, we assumed an equipment fault, because water does not climb a dry canyon. At 6:18, the lower station registered a sudden rise of 3 feet. 14 seconds later, the upper station registered the same rise. The software translated that sequence into a negative velocity and placed a red arrow on the screen pointing north, upstream. Then both readings fell to 0. 10 seconds later, they repeated. I was in the operations room finishing an incident summary when Priya Nand, our dispatch lead, called me over. She had already checked the weather feed. A small monsoon cell was active east of the fold, but radar showed no precipitation in the Burrow Wash drainage. There had been no upstream trigger, no lightning alert, and no visitor report of water. Priya assumed a bad sensor or crossed station labels. I assumed an animal had damaged a cable. Neither explanation accounted for the two probes registering the same pressure pulse and sequence. We were still looking at the graph when the emergency terminal sounded. Personal locator beacons are designed to make themselves difficult to ignore. When one activates, its identifying code travels by satellite to a rescue coordination center, and then to the agency responsible for the coordinates. The alert that appeared on Priya's screen carried a clean position inside a narrow tributary of Burrow Wash. The location repeated with an accuracy radius of less than 100 yards. The registered owner was listed as Aaron Pike, National Park Service. Priya stops typing. I felt something in my chest tighten before I consciously recognized the name. Aaron had been a backcountry ranger at Capitol Reef more than a decade earlier. I never worked with him. I arrived 2 seasons after he disappeared, but his incident had become part of our local training because almost everything that could go wrong in a flash flood response had gone wrong that day. A family of 3 had been caught in a side slot during a storm west of the park. Aaron entered with another ranger to reach them from above. The second ranger and 2 members of the family survived. Aaron and the father did not. The father's body was recovered 4 miles down the wash. Aaron's pack was found wedged beneath a tamarisk root after the water fell. His beacon was still inside, damaged but intact. His body was never located. The side slot where the search began had no official name. In the report, it was Tributary B7. Staff called it Pike's Cut when visitors were not around, though no map used that name. A rockfall the previous spring had made the entrance unstable, and we had posted a closure while geology assessed the walls. The coordinates on Priya's screen were beyond that closure, nearly half a mile inside the narrowest section. I asked her to verify the beacon identification. She did, then did it again. The hexadecimal code matched the number in Aaron's original incident file. Priya pulled a scanned property receipt showing that the physical unit had been transferred to our evidence storage after the investigation. Its battery had been removed before I joined the park. Our superintendent was still in the building. He unlocked the evidence room himself while Priya stayed on the phone with the coordination center. Aaron's beacon sat in a gray archival box on the 3rd shelf. The orange casing was cracked along one side. A plastic evidence tag ran through the antenna hinge. There was no battery inside it. At 6:23, while the superintendent held that powerless unit in both hands, the satellite received a second transmission from Pike's Cut. That was the point at which the call stopped being a probable equipment malfunction and became a rescue. We had coordinates, a registered distress device, and a closure that might have been crossed by a visitor. It did not matter that the serial number was impossible. People buy used equipment. Identification records become corrupted. Someone might have cloned a code without knowing it. Every rational possibility led to the same operational decision. Send a team, confirm the canyon is empty, and get out before darkness. I called Lena Ortiz. She was our strongest canyon rescuer and the one person on shift who had read Aaron Pike's complete file instead of the shortened training summary. Lena had worked in the park for 7 years, spoke in clipped sentences when she was worried, and distrusted anything that asked her to hurry. She listened while I explained the sensor sequence and the beacon. When I finished, she asked one question. Is the water moving? Priya looked at the graph. The lower and upper stations had triggered 4 more times. Each pulse moved upstream at a calculated speed, just under 4 miles per hour. According to the system, I said. Then treat the system as right until the canyon proves it wrong. We loaded 200 feet of static rope, anchor material, dry suits, throw bags, medical gear, and a handheld weather meter. The dry suits looked absurd under a clear evening sky. That did not matter. Lena had taught enough flood courses to understand that embarrassment was cheaper than recovery operations. 2 other rangers, Cole Ransom and EMI Sato, followed in a second truck to establish contact at the main wash. Priya remained at dispatch and kept the satellite coordination center on an open line. The drive south took a little under 40 minutes. The Henry Mountains stood dark blue beyond the fold. There was a distant vertical cloud to the east, white at the top and bruised underneath, but sunlight still covered the park road. No rain streaks crossed the horizon. No wind carried the cool smell that usually precedes a desert storm. The temperature at the trailhead was 91 degrees. The first physical sign that the instruments were not simply broken waited 50 yards inside the wash. A line of wet sand crossed the channel from wall to wall. On the downhill side, the wash was dry and powdery. On the uphill side, it was also dry. The wet band was perhaps 18 inches wide, sharply bordered, as if someone had rolled a soaked blanket across the canyon floor and lifted it away. Small bubbles rose through the sand and burst without sound. Lena crouched beside it, but did not touch. I used an infrared thermometer. The dry sand read 104 degrees. The wet band read 53. Cole took a sample in a sterile jar. Anya and I walked the perimeter, searching for seepage or a buried pipe, though we both knew there was no infrastructure beneath that wash. The wet strip darkened while we watched. Then its uphill edge moved forward by less than an inch. The downhill edge followed. The entire band was crawling north without widening. We backed away and marked its position with 2 survey flags. Lena radioed the observation to Priya. "Wide." Before Priya answered, water hissed through my handheld radio. It sounded close enough to be pouring over the speaker grill. I pulled the radio away from my vest. The unit was dry. The hiss continued for 3 seconds and stopped. Priya's voice returned cleanly. She told us the lower sensor had triggered again at the exact moment the wet band moved. We could have called the canyon unsafe and withdrawn. In most circumstances, unexplained water behavior in a slot is enough reason to keep everyone out. The problem was the beacon. It had transmitted twice more while we drove, and the last coordinate had shifted 60 yards deeper into Pike's Cut. A moving signal suggested a moving person. If someone was injured but ambulatory, they might be following the slot in the wrong direction, farther from the exit. We divided the response. Cole and AMI would remain at the main wash above the moving wet band, establish a high anchor, and monitor both the sky and our radios. Lena and I would enter Pike's Cut in dry suits, carrying the minimum rescue load. We agreed on a hard turnaround of 8:30 and an immediate retreat if either ranger reported water entering the drainage. Nobody argued. The sky remained bright enough to make our precautions feel theatrical. The closure sign at the tributary mouth was still in place. So was the waist-high barrier we had built from steel posts and cable. The cable had not been cut or unclipped. There were no footprints around it except faint prints from the geology team several weeks earlier. Lena and I climbed over without disturbing the lock. Pike's Cut began as a shallow crease and narrowed quickly. The floor changed from loose sand to packed red silt. Rockfall scars showed pale against the darker walls. I checked each overhang before moving beneath it. Lena watched the ground. 200 yards in, she raised one hand. Fresh boot prints crossed the floor ahead of us. They began at the right wall, not near it but against it, with the heels cut off by sandstone. The tracks continued into the center of the slot and turned upstream. Water shone inside each impression, though the surrounding silt was dry. The tread was an older Vibram pattern used on Park Service issue boots around the time Aaron disappeared. I knew that because the same pattern appeared in photographs from his search file. The size looked correct as well. Beside those prints ran a second set. They were larger, with a chipped triangular block under the right heel. 6 months earlier, a nail had torn that exact block from my own boot. While I was repairing a fence near Cathedral Valley, I lifted my foot and compared the sole. The damage matched down to a thin diagonal cut beside the missing rubber. My tracks began at the wall, too. Lena stared at them, then at my boots, then behind us. Our real footprints entered from the mouth of the slot and ended where we stood. The duplicate set ahead of us pointed in the same direction we were facing. They were not impressions we had somehow made and forgotten. They were waiting for us. I photographed the tracks with a scale marker and recorded our position. Training gave my hands something useful to do while my mind tried to build explanations. Someone might own the same model and size. The heel damage could be similar. The prints could have emerged from a shallow ledge hidden by angle. Each idea worked until I looked directly at the first impression, half of it buried beneath an unbroken wall. Lena touched the water inside one of my duplicate tracks with a gloved finger. She rubbed it against her thumb and smelled it. Not rain, she said. The water carried the mineral odor of a deep well, cold stone, and faint sulfur. Borough wash runoff usually smelled of wet dust, crushed sage, and whatever organic debris the flood had collected. This smelled as if it had spent years underground. My radio clicked once. Priya said our beacon coordinate had moved again. It now sat directly over the boot prints. The alert tone sounded a second later, not from our packs, but from somewhere inside the sandstone wall. It was not loud. Personal locator beacons do not normally broadcast an audible homing tone through solid rock, and the damaged unit in our evidence room had never possessed a working speaker. What we heard was the electronic pulse from the emergency terminal rendered as a thin, regular chirp. Daddy. It came once every 50 seconds. Each chirp seemed to originate several feet behind the right wall. I placed my palm against the sandstone. It was cold enough to hurt. Lena used a small inspection hammer to tap the surface. Solid rock answered for the first few feet. Farther along, the tone changed. The wall still looked continuous, but the hammer produced a hollow return, as if a narrow cavity ran behind it. That was geologically possible. Slot canyons form along weaknesses, and abandoned channels can lie close together with only thin fins between them. What was not possible was the beacon position updating from one side of that fin to the other without any opening connecting the two. We followed the tracks. Aaron's old tread stayed half a step ahead of mine. Both sets held clear water. Neither showed hesitation at loose stones or changes in grade. They moved with the spacing of two people who knew exactly where they were going. At the next bend, the prints stopped. The wall there carried a dark horizontal stain 6 feet above the floor, the kind of high water mark left by a previous flood. Embedded in the stain were fragments of grass, twigs, and a strip of faded orange nylon. I recognized the nylon from photographs of Aaron's pack. The recovered pack had been missing one compression strap. Dot. Lena climbed onto a low shelf and pulled gently at the fabric with forceps. It did not come free. The strap did not rest on the rock. It entered it. Half an inch of woven material protruded from sandstone without a crack around it, as though the wall had hardened after swallowing the rest. She cut a fiber sample and sealed it. Neither of us spoke about what that implied. Priya radioed that the satellite had placed the beacon another 120 yards upstream. Cole added that the wet band in the main wash had passed their first survey flags and was approaching the mouth of the side slot. It still measured 18 inches across. It still traveled uphill. No rise at either station, Cole said. Whatever this is, it isn't adding water. That bothered me more than a conventional flood would have. A flood gains and loses volume. It spreads, sinks into sediment, leaves pools in depressions. The wet band behaved like a boundary moving through material rather than water moving over it. We continued, but more slowly. The slot tightened to shoulder width. Daylight became a narrow ribbon overhead. The temperature dropped with each turn, which is normal in deep sandstone shade, but the change was too fast. My weather meter read 68 degrees, then 59, then 47 within less than 200 feet. Why? Condensation appeared on the outside of my dry suit. When I wiped it away, more formed immediately. There was still no moisture on the walls. The sound began shortly after that. At first it resembled wind moving over the canyon rim. Then it deepened into the continuous low vibration of heavy water. Flash floods announced themselves in different ways depending on the canyon. Sometimes you hear rocks striking each other. Sometimes the air changes pressure. In a tight slot, a large flood can sound like a freight train long before it reaches you. This sound came from above. Leon pointed her light upward. The strip of visible sky was clean blue. Dust drifted down through it. Nothing crossed the rim. I called Cole and asked for conditions in the main wash. Dry. I asked Priya for the sensor data. No new pressure increase. She told me radar still showed no precipitation in the drainage. The roar continued directly over our heads, following as we walked. Around the next bend, my duplicate footprints reappeared. This time they did not run beside Aaron's. They came toward us. The wet toes pointed downstream. The strides were longer and uneven. Two impressions had only the front half of the boot, as if the person making them had been running. A dark smear marked the left wall at shoulder height. I touched it with gauze. It was blood, diluted by cold mineral water. Lena checked me for injuries without being asked. My shoulders and arms were unmarked. We both understood that the absence of blood did not feel reassuring. "We turn at the next safe expansion," she said. I agreed. That should have ended the operation. We had enough evidence to close the entire wash, bring in a larger team, and wait for full daylight. Then the beacon transmitted again, and beneath the automatic satellite data came something new. A second digital burst from a commercial satellite messenger registered to a man named Owen Kessler. Owen was a 32-year-old photographer from Colorado. His message contained no text, only an SOS activation and a location within 30 yards of Aaron Pike's cloned signal. Priya contacted the emergency number on the account. Owen's sister said he was traveling in southern Utah, but she did not know his exact route. His vehicle description matched a blue Tacoma Cole had seen parked at an unmarked pullout north of the Burrow Wash trailhead. Now we had a living person with a current registration. Lena closed her eyes for one breath. Then she told Priya we were continuing until we found Owen, or reached terrain we could not safely cross. Cole and EMI began moving toward the side slot entrance with additional rope, but we ordered them to stop if the wet band reached the closure barrier. 2 rescuers in unexplained conditions were a problem. 4 would be a casualty list. Owen's messenger sent another position. It was stationary inside a wider chamber shown on our topographic layer as a small widening in the slot. The distance was less than a quarter mile. We reached that chamber at 7:36. The canyon opened into a circular space perhaps 30 feet across. A fallen chockstone bridged the walls 15 feet above us. Beneath it stood a pool of perfectly clear water. No pool appeared in the route notes, geology photographs, or Aaron's incident maps. The chamber floor should have been packed silt sloping toward the main drainage. Instead, the water filled a round depression from wall to wall. Its surface sat absolutely still despite the roar above us. My light penetrated several feet and found no bottom. Owen's pack lay on a shelf across the pool. The messenger was clipped to one shoulder strap, its SOS indicator flashing. Beside it rested a camera and a pair of hiking poles. There was no sign of Owen. I called his name. The chamber returned at once in the normal way. Then, several seconds later, his name came back from beneath the pool in my own voice. Lena heard it too. Her face changed, but her hands remained steady. She built an anchor around a sandstone horn while I examined the edges. There was no dry route to the far shelf. A narrow ledge entered the water on our left and continued below the surface. The duplicate tracks crossed there. Aaron's prints went down into the pool. Mine came out. The water inside those emerging impressions flowed upward from the sand for a second, filling each heel, then drained toward the wall instead of toward the pool. I tied into the rope. Lena backed up the anchor and attached a belay device. We agreed that I would move only far enough to reach the pack and assess the far side. The dry suit would protect me from cold water, though we had no idea of the depth. I clipped a probe pole to my harness and stepped onto the submerged ledge. The water was not cold. It had no temperature I could identify. My right leg felt numb at the surface and overheated below the knee. The dry suit remained dry, but pressure built against the fabric from several directions at once. When I moved the pole forward, its tip struck stone at 2 feet. 1 step later, it failed to touch bottom at its full 6-foot length. I retreated. The water pulled on the pole after I removed it, not downward but toward the canyon entrance. I nearly lost my grip. Lena found another option. The walls above the pool were narrow enough to traverse by stemming, pressing boots against one side and back against the other. It was physically demanding, but kept us out of the water. I climbed first with the rope running through protection placed in cracks. Halfway across, I looked down. The surface no longer reflected the chamber ceiling. It showed the same chamber from a position high above, as if I were looking through a hole in the floor, at another version of the room. In that lower chamber, the pool occupied the ceiling. A man stood on the far shelf beside Owen's pack. He wore a faded Park Service shirt and an orange rescue helmet. His face was distorted by slow ripples, but he raised one hand and pointed behind me. I turned. Lena's anchor was sliding uphill. The sandstone horn had not broken. The sling around it was moving over solid rock, sinking into the surface the way Aaron's orange strap had entered the wall. Inch by inch, the webbing disappeared. Lena tried to unload the system, but the rope tightened across the pool. I pushed harder against the walls and reached the far shelf as the last section of sling vanished. The rope dropped into the water. Lena remained on the near side, separated from me by 12 feet of pool. She still held the free end. I secured myself to a crack and told her to stay where she was while I checked the pack. Owen's camera was wet. The messenger and pack were dry. Inside, I found 2 liters of water, a jacket, food, a printed permit for a different route, and a small notebook. The last entry had been written that afternoon. Owen described hearing someone whistle from behind the closure barrier while he photographed the main wash. He thought another visitor had entered the closed slot. He crossed the barrier to warn them about rockfall. The next page contained only 5 words. The ranger keeps walking backward. Below that line, the paper had been rubbed thin by something wet. Lena called my name. She had found a boot lodged beneath the chalkstone above her. It was modern, gray, and the right size for Owen. A bare ankle protruded behind it. He was wedged in a narrow space between the chalkstone and the wall, 15 feet above the pool. From the floor, the angle had hidden his body. I climbed from the shelf toward him while Lena established a temporary anchor using 2 cams and a dry crack. Owen hung face down, one leg trapped, both arms limpy. I could not tell how he had reached that position. There were no accessible holds below him and no rope attached to his harness. His clothing was soaked, but water did not drip from it. It traveled upward in thin streams along his jacket and vanished into the rock above. I reached his neck and found pulse. It was slow but strong. His breathing was shallow. A swollen knot marked his temple. I stabilized his head, attached him to my system, and began working his boot free. The leg was not crushed. The sole had jammed inside a narrow seam that looked too small to accept it. Each time I pulled, the rock seemed to tighten around the rubber. Owen opened his eyes. He did not look at me. He looked through the gap beneath his own arm, down at the pool. "Don't answer him," he whispered. I asked who he meant. The roar above us stopped. In the sudden quiet, a voice spoke from the water. It belonged to Cole, waiting near the canyon entrance. "Daniel," it said. "Come back the way you came." My radio remained silent. The voice repeated the sentence, but the second time it belonged to Priya. The third time it belonged to Lena Daya. Each version matched the speaker closely enough to be recognizable and poorly enough to make my skin tighten. The cadence was reversed. The last word carried the stress that should have belonged to the first. Owen began shaking. "It learns you from the water." I asked how long he had been there. "Since tomorrow morning," he said. Then he lost consciousness again. Lena and I did not discuss the answer. We moved. I cut the heel from Owen's boot, freed his foot, and lowered him to the far shelf. Lena sent a new rope end across by clipping it to a weighted throw bag. On the third attempt, I caught it. We built independent anchors on both sides and rigged a guided traverse above the pool. While we worked, the surface began to tilt. The water remained contained within the depression, but one side rose higher than the other, like liquid held beneath invisible glass. Within a minute, the uphill edge stood nearly 3 feet above the downhill edge. Small stones lifted from the bottom and rolled up the slope of the surface. A branch emerged, traveled backward through the water, and entered the sandstone wall root first. The flood sensor outside triggered again. Priya's voice reached us over the radio, urgent and clean. The wet band had crossed the closure barrier. Cole and Emmy were retreating to high ground. At its current speed, it would reach our chamber in less than 12 minutes. We placed Owen in a rescue harness and hauled him onto the guided rope. Lena crossed first to receive him. I remained on the far shelf, operating the lowering line while the pool continued to rise uphill. Halfway across, Owen woke and began fighting the harness. He stared past Lena toward the entrance. That's not the way out. Lena told him he was safe. He twisted hard enough to rotate beneath the rope and pointed at the solid wall where the first set of tracks had begun. "Hey," said the water already knows that way. At that moment, Aaron Pike's beacon chirped from inside the wall behind me. The sandstone split along a vertical seam. It did not crack outward. The two sides softened and folded apart without falling, revealing a narrow passage filled with dim red light. Wet boot prints crossed its floor. Aaron's tread led in. Mine led out. Every rule of canyon rescue told us not to enter an unknown constriction with water approaching. Every map and photograph told us the passage did not exist. The established route behind Lena was still open, but Cole's report placed the moving boundary between us and that exit. We had less than 10 minutes before it reached the chamber. The choice was not between safe and unsafe. It was between two kinds of unsafe, one of which had left evidence that I would emerge from it. Lena brought Owen across the traverse and checked the opening. Cold air moved out of it with the steady pressure of a cave. Capitol Reef contains joints, shallow alcoves, and short solution cavities, but not a known cave system beneath Burrow Wash. Her light reached 40 feet before the passage curved left. The floor rose at a gentle angle. That upward grade decided it. If water entered the chamber, higher ground gave us time. We transferred Owen to a litter, stripped the rope system as quickly as we could, and entered the wall. The sandstone closed behind my shoulder. There was no grinding or collapse. The opening narrowed like a mouth relaxing. Lena shoved the trailing rope through a gap an instant before it sealed. When I turned, my light showed uninterrupted red rock. I struck it with my palm and heard solid stone. The passage was barely wide enough for the litter. Its walls held smooth scallops like those carved by centuries of flow, but the scallops faced the wrong direction. Pebbles rested on small ledges at angles that should not have supported them. Thin streams ran upward along both walls and disappeared into the ceiling. Aaron's prints continued ahead. My wet prints came toward us on the opposite side, keeping close to the wall. We followed them in reverse. 50 yards in, the ceiling lowered, and the red light faded. We switched on headlamps. The roar returned beneath our boots. It carried voices now. Most were too distorted to understand. A few emerged clearly. Coordinates, equipment checks, a request for more rope. They were fragments of rescue traffic. Lena recognized language from Aaron's incident transcript, including a transmission made by his partner minutes before the flood struck. The words played in reverse order. A confirmation arrived before the question. A warning about rising water came after someone reported being swept away. Owen opened his eyes again. He stared at the ceiling and said the ranger had brought him through this passage earlier. The man had walked backward the entire way, never taking his eyes from Owen. Each time Owen tried to ask a question, the ranger held one finger to his lips. He said it listens through anything wet. Owen whispered. He said not to let it hear where we were going. I asked how the ranger had said that if Owen was not supposed to answer him. Owen looked confused. He didn't say it yet. Lena told him to save his breath. The passage divided ahead. Aaron's tracks turned left and descended toward the sound of water. Mine came from the right branch, where the floor continued upward. For the first time, the two sets separated. A figure stood in the left passage. My headlamp found an orange helmet, a dark uniform, and one pale hand resting against the wall. Water rose from his boots in narrow ribbons. His face remained outside the beam no matter how I moved the light. He lifted his hand and pointed left toward his own tracks. Owen made a sound deep in his throat. Lena did not look at the figure. She placed a small bubble level on the right-hand floor and confirmed the grade. "We follow elevation," she said. It was the most comforting sentence I heard that night. We chose the branch that climbed. The figure did not follow. His radio did. From the darkness behind us came Aaron Pike's final logged transmission from 11 years earlier. The original transcript recorded only 4 clear words before static. "Tell them it turned." In the passage we heard the rest. "Tell them it turned around when it learned my weight." The floor jumped beneath us. Not shook. Jumped. A pressure wave traveled uphill through the sandstone, lifting the litter and slamming it back down. Water burst from the seams behind us. It formed an 18-inch band across the passage, perfectly straight from wall to wall. The boundary moved toward us at walking speed. We carried Owen uphill. The passage narrowed, forcing us to rotate the litter and slide it on one side. The wet band followed without accelerating. Wherever it passed, the rock darkened for several seconds. Voices rose from the temporary water and called our names. We kept radio discipline and answered only transmissions carrying the authentication phrase we had established with Priya before entry. At the next constriction, the litter jammed. Lena climbed over Owen to pull from the front while I pushed from behind. The canyon squeezed my left shoulder against a sharp projection. Fabric tore. Pain followed, and blood ran beneath the dry suit sleeve. On the wall beside my face was the dark smear we had found earlier in the main slot. I understood then that the duplicate prints had not been showing a possible future. They had been recording one. Somewhere in the passage, the path we were taking had already happened to the water. It knew the pressure of my boots, the length of my stride, and the place where I would bleed. The wet boundary rounded the bend behind us. We freed the litter by cutting away one frame handle. Lena crawled backward into a vertical crack and found open air above. The route notes showed no exit, but a faint evening glow filtered through a seam. She climbed, built an anchor around a buried chalkstone, and hauled Owen while I guided the litter from below. The water reached my boots. There was no impact. The band passed through the rubber and continued uphill. My legs became impossibly heavy. For 1 second I felt another floor beneath the real one and another current pulling me in the opposite direction. In the wet surface at my feet, Aaron stood shoulder to shoulder with me. He was younger than the photographs in his file. His eyes were open. Sand filled his mouth. One hand gripped the shoulder strap missing from his recovered pack. He did not point toward either branch. He pressed both palms against my chest and pushed. The force threw me upward into the crack. Lena caught my harness and hauled. My left boot remained below for a fraction of a second after my leg moved, as if another foot inside it were resisting. Then the rubber tore free with a sound like fabric ripping underwater. We emerged onto a sandstone bench in the main wash less than 300 yards from Cole and MII. There was no visible opening behind us. The crack Lena had climbed through ended in a shallow alcove barely 2 feet deep. Owen's litter lay on the bench. Our ropes ran into solid rock and stopped. When Cole pulled, 20 feet of wet line slid out of the wall with a cleanly cut end. The moving band never emerged. Both flood sensors returned to 0. At 8:11, the beacon registered one final coordinate inside the alcove where we appeared. Then Aaron Pike's identification vanished from the satellite system. Owen's messenger continued transmitting until Priya canceled the alert. Owen spent 2 nights in the hospital in Richfield. He had a concussion, mild hypothermia, and early dehydration. None of those findings fit well with the temperature or the amount of time he had been missing, but they were ordinary enough for the medical report. He remembered crossing the closure after hearing a whistle. He remembered a ranger in an old uniform walking backward through the slot. He remembered water rising along the walls and voices asking him to name the route he intended to use. After that, his memory broke into pieces. He had no explanation for the sentence about tomorrow. When we showed him the notebook, he recognized his handwriting but not the line about the backward walking ranger. He stopped taking photographs in slot canyons. As far as I know, he has never returned to Capitol Reef. The physical evidence was harder to dismiss. The fiber Lena cut from the wall matched the material and dye lot of Aaron's missing pack strap. Dead. The blood from the smear matched me. The laboratory found no sign that it had aged for 11 years or even 11 hours. It was fresh when collected, despite being on the wall before I was injured. Water samples from the tracks and from my rope contained dissolved minerals unlike recent runoff in Burrow Wash. A consulting geochemist said the profile resembled groundwater that had remained isolated in deep sandstone for a very long time. He refused to estimate how long from one sample. He also found pollen from plants growing in lower reaches of the drainage, several miles downhill from where we collected it. In other words, the water had come from below us, from downstream, or from a depth that should not have been connected to the canyon. Possibly all three. The sensor hardware passed every test. Investigators switched the station labels, recalibrated the probes, replaced the batteries, and replayed the raw data. The sequence remained unchanged. 9 pressure pulses had moved uphill. The narrow band had traveled at 3.8 miles per hour without gaining or losing measurable volume. Aaron's beacon remained in its evidence box throughout the operation. The superintendent and Priya both signed statements confirming it. When the box was opened the following morning, the empty battery compartment contained fine red silt and a single drop of water. The evidence seal had not been broken. The drop climbed the inside wall of the casing while they watched and vanished into the antenna hinge. The park closed pikes cut indefinitely. Officially, unstable rockfall justified the decision. That reason was true, and incomplete. The final incident report described the beacon identification as database contamination, the water readings as correlated sensor failure, and the passage as a disorienting side channel not represented on existing maps. A geology team spent 3 days surveying the alcove where we emerged. Ground-penetrating radar found continuous sandstone behind it for more than 60 feet. No passage. No chamber. No pool. I kept the damaged boot. For months, damp red sand appeared inside it, no matter how often I cleaned it. The sand always collected beneath the missing triangular tread block on the heel. Eventually, I sealed the boot in a clear equipment bag and placed it in my garage. The bag fogs from the inside whenever there is heavy rain east of the water pocket fold. Lena still works canyon rescue, though she carries a carpenter's level in her pack now. She says it is for checking improvised litter systems. We both know that is not the only reason. If a route splits underground, she follows elevation before footprints, voices, or maps. I remained at Capitol Reef. Most flood seasons behaved exactly as they should. Storms formed, runoff gathered, and water traveled downhill. We issued warnings, closed trails, and reopened them after the channels cleared. The landscape returned to being dangerous in ways we understood. The research team removed the Burrow Wash sensors the following spring. Before they did, a motion camera at the lower station recorded one final event on a cloudless morning. The video shows a dry wash and an empty frame. Nothing enters from either side. At 9:14, a wet boot print appears in the sand beside the sensor. 50 seconds later, another appears 3 feet uphill. Then another. The tread belongs to Aaron Pike's old boots. A second set forms beside it with the chipped triangle missing from the right heel. The prints continue against gravity until they leave the camera's view. DYTL. I was in the district office when they appeared. My damaged boot was sealed in my garage. The camera never recorded anyone walking there. It only recorded the canyon, remembering that we had. At 3:07 in the morning, the Brooks Falls camera showed me walking across the empty platform. I was 40 miles away in King Salmon, watching the live feed with 2 other rangers. The woman on screen raised a radio. Mine answered in my voice. Marker 9. Don't let me cross the bears. 6 minutes later, every GPS-collared brown bear in the study converged on the same coordinates in the Valley of 10,000 Smokes and stopped in a perfect circle, facing inward. When we arrived, nobody stood inside it. Only my Park Service badge lay pressed into warm ash. I was still wearing mine. My name is Mara Velez. I have worked bear management at Katmai for 11 seasons, long enough to distrust any story that begins by treating a brown bear like a symbol. Bears are not guardians, judges, or messengers. They are intelligent animals making decisions about food, distance, risk, and memory. If 12 unrelated bears change direction within minutes and walk toward one empty patch of volcanic ash, the correct first question is not what they sensed spiritually. The correct question is what food source, odor, carcass, or human mistake brought them together. That rule kept me calm for roughly 20 minutes. Late September is the quiet edge of the season. Most visitors have left Brooks Camp. The salmon run has thinned. The cottonwoods have gone yellow, and nights feel much larger after the lodge closes. A few maintenance workers and research crews remain in the park, but much of our monitoring happens from the mainland headquarters in King Salmon, Illinois. Cameras, weather stations, and satellite collars let us watch places that may be separated from us by mountains, lakes, ash fields, and weather that makes a short flight impossible. I was covering an overnight telemetry shift because one of our wildlife technicians had developed a fever. The work was usually uneventful. Every 15 minutes, the tracking software refreshed locations from 12 collared bears participating in a movement study. The animals were spread across a broad area between the Brooks River drainage and the northern edge of the Valley of 10,000 Smokes. 2 were near salmon streams. 1 had barely moved for hours, probably feeding on a carcass. The others traced the wandering, inefficient routes of animals preparing for winter. Ranger Eli Bowman sat across from me, reviewing maintenance requests. Our dispatcher, Sienna Cho, worked in the next room. On a wall monitor, the Brooks Falls camera showed an empty viewing platform, dark river, and pale foam moving beneath infrared illumination. The public live stream had ended for the night, but the internal feed remained active, so staff could monitor infrastructure and late-season bear activity. At 3:07, a person entered from the left side of the platform. I noticed the uniform first. Gray shirt, green trousers, flat-brimmed hat, radio on the left shoulder. The figure walked slowly to the rail and faced the camera. Infrared flattened the colors, but the cut and equipment placement were unmistakably Park Service. Eli looked up when I stopped typing. The platform was closed. No ranger was stationed at Brooks Camp that night, and the last maintenance crew had checked in from their bunkhouse more than an hour earlier. Sienna called them while Eli enlarged the feed. 4 workers answered. All were indoors. None had been near the fault. Then the figure lifted her face. She had my narrow jaw, my dark hair tied low behind the neck, and the pale line through my left eyebrow from a childhood bicycle accident. Even under infrared, I could see the small asymmetry in my mouth that appears when I am tired. She was not similar to me. She was a live image of me wearing the same uniform I had on in the operations room. I stood so quickly that my chair struck the wall. Eli looked at me, then back at the screen. He asked Sienna to record the raw stream locally and contact the Brooks maintenance crew again. We checked the timestamp against 2 other cameras. The river moved continuously. A gull crossed one frame, and then another at the expected interval. This was not an old clip inserted into the feed. The woman on the platform raised her radio. My own radio opened with a burst of static. My voice came through the speaker, compressed but exact. "Marker 9, don't let me cross the bears." The transmission ended. The figure continued facing the camera. She did not lower her radio until mine clicked close. Sienna traced the signal. It did not come through our repeater network. The receiver behaved as if another handheld unit were transmitting from somewhere inside the headquarters building. We searched every room, vehicle bay, locker, and exterior wall. No second radio was active. When we returned to the operations room, the platform was empty. No recording showed the woman leaving. In one frame, she stood beside the rail. In the next, separated by 1/30th of a second, the space was vacant. The river and background remained continuous. Marker 9 referred to an old geological survey point near the northern mouth of the Valley of 10,000 Smokes. The valley was formed by the Novarupta eruption in the early 20th century, when ash and pumice filled an enormous drainage and buried it beneath deposits hundreds of feet thick in places. The famous steam vents that gave the valley its name have mostly faded, but heat, gas, unstable surfaces, and hidden channels remain part of the landscape. Marker 9 sat well away from the usual road corridor and terrain most visitors never entered. I pulled up the collar map. The first bear had already changed direction. Female 840, a large adult often seen near the Brooks River, had turned southwest less than 2 minutes after the radio transmission. A younger male near Margot Creek turned south. Another female left a feeding area and began moving southeast. One by one, the tracks bent toward the same point. At first, I suspected corrupted coordinates. Then, the next satellite refresh arrived. Each caller had advanced along its new route. Speeds varied, but the headings converged on Marker 9 with the precision animals do not normally display. We contacted Jonah Keene, the wildlife biologist responsible for the study. He drove to headquarters in 12 minutes, still pulling a jacket over his sleep clothes. Jonah checked the raw collar packets, satellite timestamps, and base station logs. None showed signs of duplication or software error. He overlaid wind direction and known salmon streams. No attractant explained the movement. The bears were approaching from multiple directions, some upwind and some downwind. At 3:13, the first two stopped. They had not reached Marker 9. They stopped almost exactly 1 mile from it, separated from each other by several miles of terrain. At the next update, both remained stationary. Then a third bear reached the same radius and stopped. By 3:40, all 12 collars formed a rough ring around the marker. The circle was not geometrically perfect, because the landscape forced the animals around ridges and drainages, but the distance from each collar to the center varied by less than 200 feet. Every bear's head orientation, estimated from collar motion sensors, faced inward. Jonah stared at the map for a long time. "They're not gathering," he said. "They're containing." I told him bears do not contain things. I know. The Brooks camera remained empty. Sienna reviewed recordings from the other live cameras. At 3:14, a camera near the lower river captured 8 adult bears abandoning the water within the same minute. They did not run blindly. They climbed the bank, paused as if orienting, and traveled inland. None wore collars, so they did not appear on our study map. At 3:52, my radio transmitted again. This time, my copied voice spoke more softly. "I'm inside now." We initiated an aerial response at first light. That decision was not based on a belief that another version of me waited in the valley. Marker 9 was remote, but researchers, hunters outside the park boundary, and unauthorized visitors occasionally reached places we assumed were empty. The camera image might have been a deliberate intrusion into our feed. The radio transmissions might have been spoofed. The animals might have detected an aircraft carcass, a large food cache, volcanic gas, or some event not visible in the data. Every explanation required us to inspect the site. Moi. Our pilot, Aaron Dahl, arrived before dawn and checked the weather. A low ceiling covered parts of the Aleutian Range, but the route into the valley was open. Wind at marker 9 measured light from a portable station several miles away. We loaded bear deterrents, medical gear, gas monitors, sampling equipment, a satellite terminal, and a compact drone. Jonah came to interpret the collar behavior. Eli joined as a second ranger. I almost stayed behind. Seeing my face on that platform had produced a physical reluctance I did not want to dignify as fear. I understood, rationally, that resemblance could be manufactured. Video could be manipulated. Voices could be cloned. My presence might even be the goal of whoever had done it. But the copied transmission had used an old survey label few people outside park operations would recognize. If this was directed at me, sending other staff in my place would not protect them. We lifted shortly after 6. Dawn reached the upper mountains first. Snow dusted the highest ridges. Below them, the valley of 10,000 Smokes spread gray and tan beneath a thin cloud layer, less like a valley than the dried bed of an inland sea. Braided streams cut dark lines through ash. The air above the deposits often carries dust even in mild wind, giving distant slopes an unfinished appearance. Jonah watched the collar map on a tablet. All 12 animals remained on the ring. We saw the first bear from the air, at 6:41. It stood on a low ridge, broadside to the helicopter. Aaron gave it distance. The bear did not flee, charge, or display the agitation helicopters sometimes produce. It looked past us toward marker 9. 3 more came into view as we circled. Each occupied a different section of the perimeter. One sat on its haunches. Another paced 20 yards back and forth, but never crossed the same invisible boundary. None appeared to be feeding. Aaron refused to land inside the ring. I agreed. We chose a gravel bench half a mile outside it, on the leeward side of a ridge. The helicopter stayed running while we unloaded. Aaron would relocate to a safer standby point and return when called, weather permitting. The cold surprised me. Headquarters had been near freezing, but the valley wind carried a dry bite that moved through gloves and sleeves. The air smelled faintly of sulfur and clean stone. Each step sank in upon us with a soft crunch. We approached the perimeter as a line with wide spacing. Jonah monitored the nearest collar. It belonged to a male estimated at more than 800 pounds, positioned behind a rise 200 yards north of us. We could not see him until we reached the crest. He stood facing inward. His head was low, ears forward. Frost silvered the guard hairs along his shoulders. He glanced at us once, then returned his attention to the empty ash plain beyond the ridge. Their behavior determines distance, not our intentions. We altered course to give him room. He shifted with us, keeping his body between our team and marker 9. When we moved east, he moved east. When we stopped, he stopped. I raised one arm and spoke in the calm voice we use around bears. He looked at me directly. Then he looked over my shoulder. I turned. Nobody stood behind me. The bear huffed and backed away 3 steps. His reaction was not directed at Jonah or Eli. He tracked a point at my shoulder height, moving through empty air toward the ring. My radio clicked. No. My own voice whispered. He can see both of us. The bear charged. It was a short defensive rush, powerful enough to erase thought. We grouped, raised deterrent, and shouted. The animal covered half the distance, then stopped so abruptly that ash rolled around its front legs. It had reached the invisible circle. The bear would not cross. It swung its head toward something beside me and snapped its jaws. Nothing was there. After several seconds, it retreated to the ridge, still facing inward. We crossed the boundary. The temperature rose immediately. My weather meter changed from 34 degrees to 58 in less than 6 steps. Wind disappeared. The sound of the helicopter faded even though Aaron had not yet lifted away. When I looked back, the bear remained on the ridge. Steam rose from its mouth. My own breath no longer showed. Marker 9 stood half a mile ahead, a metal survey post protruding from pale ash. The ground around it looked undisturbed. No person, tent, vehicle, or carcass was visible. We had walked less than 100 yards inside the ring when Eli noticed my badge was missing. My uniform still held its leather backing and 2 metal clutch fasteners. The arrowhead-shaped badge itself was gone. I searched my jacket, harness, and path behind us. Nothing. Jonah raised one hand and pointed toward the survey post. Something metallic reflected the morning light at its base. We reached marker 9 at 7:12. My badge lay face up in the ash. Its number, scratches, and worn patch of enamel matched mine exactly. The original badge was still attached to my uniform. It had returned without any of us seeing it. The second badge was not a cheap reproduction. It had the correct weight, stamped maker's mark, and the tiny depression near the lower point where I had dropped mine on concrete during my first season. Even the serial number matched. The only difference was temperature. The badge on my chest felt cold from the air. The one in the ash was warm enough that Eli handled it with gloves. We photographed it in place and sealed it inside a sample pouch. As soon as the zipper closed, my radio emitted a low tone. The badge vibrated against the plastic in the same rhythm. Jonah checked the collar map. The ring had contracted by approximately 60 yards. Every bear had moved inward at almost the same time. I called Aaron. The helicopter had lifted to a standby area south of the valley. She could return within 10 minutes. We decided we had enough evidence and no valid reason to remain. Whatever had gathered the bears might be dangerous, but nothing visible required rescue. Our safest choice was to retrace our route, give the nearest animal distance, and leave. We turned away from marker 9. The survey post cast 4 shadows. There were 3 of us. The low sun should have produced 1 narrow shadow from the post, and 1 from each person, all extending west. Instead, a 4th human outline lay between mine and Eli's. It wore the silhouette of a flat-brimmed hat. When I moved my arm, the extra shadow moved first. Jonah saw it and stepped sideways. The shadow remained attached to me. Eli aimed his body camera at the ground. On its small screen, the 4th shadow did not lie flat. It appeared to stand upright, facing us from several feet away. The screen showed a woman in ranger uniform with her head slightly lowered. We looked at the same place with our eyes. Empty air. Eli lowered the camera. The display went black. My radio clicked once, and the copied voice said, "Keep looking." We did the opposite. We shut down every device with an active lens except the equipment needed for navigation. Jonah covered the tablet camera with tape. Eli powered off his body camera. I placed the drone case back in the pack unopened. The extra shadow flattened and disappeared. The duplicate badge continued vibrating inside the evidence pouch. We walked toward the perimeter using a compass bearing rather than the tablet. The valley surface was open enough that navigation should have been simple. Marker 9 remained behind us. The ridge holding the male bear stood ahead. Our pace was steady. After 12 minutes, we passed marker 9 again. Nobody had turned. The compass still showed north. Our footprints formed a straight line in the ash from the post, crossed the plain, and returned to the post from the opposite side. The route should have carried us half a mile away. Instead, the landscape had folded into a loop without any visible change in direction. Eli swore quietly. Jonah checked the handheld GPS despite the covered camera. The screen placed us 300 yards east of the marker. The physical post stood close enough to touch. Ziena called from headquarters. Our satellite position had stopped updating 7 minutes earlier. She was still receiving biometric data from Jonah's field monitor and audio from our radios, but every mapping system placed us at the point where we first entered the ring. Then she asked whether another ranger had joined us. The Brooks Falls camera had activated on motion. 4 people stood on the platform. 3 matched Eli, Jonah, and me. The 4th wore my face. We were all in the valley. Ziana sent a still image to Jonah's tablet. Against our earlier rule, he uncovered the screen. The photograph showed us from behind, lined along the platform rail as if watching the river. My duplicate stood apart and faced the camera. In one hand, she held the evidence pouch containing the second badge. Jonah looked down. The pouch was no longer clipped to his vest. It lay beside marker 9. The duplicate badge rested outside the plastic, half buried in ash. A damp thumbprint marked its face. The collar map refreshed. The bears had moved inward another 100 yards. We tried a different route. Instead of walking directly away from the marker, we followed a shallow drainage west, keeping the sun at our left. We placed orange flags every 50 yards. The first 6 remained visible behind us. The 7th appeared ahead before Eli removed it from his pack. He held the unused flag beside the identical one planted in our path. Both had his initials written on the tape in the same black marker. The pre-existing flag leaned toward a low rise. Beyond it, the ash had collapsed around a rectangular metal box. Jonah recognized the housing of an old volcanic monitoring station, a design used in the park decades earlier. No active station appeared on our map. Kaiwand. Most historical units had been removed as instruments improved. The box stood open. Its interior contained a reel-to-reel field recorder, corroded batteries, and a stack of narrow paper charts protected beneath a warped cover. The equipment should have been ruined by weather. Instead, one reel turned slowly. The tape moved backward. Sound came from a small speaker. Wind, footsteps, and the man dictating observations played in reverse. Eli stopped the reel and rewound several feet by hand in the opposite direction. When he restarted it, the voice became intelligible. The recording was dated in the autumn of 1968. Di Ta Tao. A geological field crew had noticed unusual ground heat near marker 9. Their notes described compass deviation, equipment returning to previously surveyed points, and brown bears standing at regular distances around the station. The speaker treated the animal behavior as coincidence until the final entry. "There are 4 of us at the post," he said. "The camera keeps counting 5. The tape clicked. A second voice answered using the first man's exact tone. "There are 5 now." Static filled the speaker. Beneath it, something large breathed. The written charts contained no names, only temperature lines and pressure readings. On the final page, 5 human fingerprints had been pressed into volcanic ash and taped to the paper. 4 were labeled with field initials. The 5th was labeled copy. Sienna searched our digital archive while we examined the station. She found a brief equipment loss report from that season. A recorder near marker 9 had disappeared during a wind event. The 4-person crew returned safely, but 1 member resigned within a week. No animal behavior appeared in the official summary. The wind reached us at 7:48. It arrived as a brown wall moving down the valley. Erin called before visibility disappeared. She had encountered severe turbulence and blowing ash south of our position. Landing was impossible until the gust front passed. We were to shelter, maintain radio contact, and stay clear of low channels where dust could concentrate. The male bear on the northern ridge began walking toward us. So did every other collared animal. Jonah's map showed the ring shrinking steadily. The bears were not charging. They were advancing at a uniform pace, preserving the circle. At that rate, they would reach marker 9 in less than 20 minutes. We moved to the lee side of the low rise and put on eye protection and respirators. The abandoned equipment box offered no shelter, but the collapsed station had left a shallow trench reinforced by metal panels. We crouched there as the gust front struck. Ash erased the world beyond 10 feet. The wind produced a constant granular hiss against our clothing. Daylight turned orange. Static overwhelmed the radios, though Sienna's voice occasionally broke through. Our gas monitors showed normal oxygen and no dangerous volcanic readings. Whatever happened next could not be blamed on carbon dioxide, sulfur gas, or obvious hypoxia. A fourth person entered the trench. She crawled over the metal edge beside Eli, covered her face from the wind, and pressed against us for shelter. For several seconds, the action felt so natural that nobody reacted. Then she lifted her head. I was looking at myself from less than 3 feet away. The copy wore my uniform exactly, including dirt on the knees and the leather backing where the badge should have been. Ash clung to her hair. Her breathing moved at the same rate as mine. A fresh scratch crossed her right cheek. My cheek began to sting. When I touched it, blood marked my glove, though nothing had struck me. Eli raised bear spray. The copy raised an empty hand in the same position. "Don't," she said. Her voice was mine without radio compression. "The bears are closing because you brought the camera." Jonah asked where she came from. She looked toward the old recorder. "You watched me arrive." I told her to step out of the trench. She smiled with the tired asymmetry I had seen on the Brooks feed. "You first." The wind swallowed all sound for a moment. When it eased, the trench was empty except for the three of us. No footprints led away. The ash where the copy had crouched was warm and damp. Sienna's voice broke through the radio. She was shouting my name. The Brooks camera showed the platform again. This time, only my duplicate stood there. She was holding Eli's body camera. Eli checked his chest mount. The camera was gone. On Jonah's tablet, the public platform feed switched to the missing body camera's viewpoint. It showed the three of us crouched in the trench from several feet above. A fourth head occupied the bottom of frame. My head. The viewpoint moved closer. We could not see anyone approaching through the ash. I ordered Jonah to power down the tablet. Before the screen went black, the camera moved behind me. The duplicate's hand entered frame and reached toward the back of my neck. Something cold touched my collar. I turned and swung. My arm passed through blowing ash. A Park Service badge fell at my feet. This one carried Eli's number. His real badge was still on his uniform. The bears were less than 200 yards away. We had 3 deterrent canisters, 1 flare launcher, and no defensible structure. Using any of them against 12 bears and blowing ash would create more danger than it solved. The animals had shown no interest in us before we crossed the ring. Their attention remained fixed on whatever moved beside us unseen. Jonah studied the old field charts under his jacket. The crew from 1968 had recorded the circle tightening twice. On both occasions, the bears stopped at a radius of approximately 30 yards from the station. And stream station. A note in the margin read, "No lenses after dark." Another line written by a different hand said, "They leave when the extra one is gone." We gathered every device capable of recording an image. Eli's missing body camera was beyond our reach, but we powered down the drone. Tablets, phones, and my compact incident camera. Jonah removed the batteries where possible. I asked Sienna to stop viewing the Brooks feed and disable internal recording. She hesitated because it would cut our only visual evidence. I told her the evidence was producing participants. The live feed went offline. For several seconds, nothing changed. Then the wind thinned enough for us to see the nearest bear. Female 840 stood 30 yards from the trench. Her collar was crusted with ash. Another bear appeared farther right, then another behind us. The ring had reached the same distance recorded by the old crew. All visible animals faced the center. They were not looking at marker 9. They were looking at the space immediately behind Eli. He stepped forward. The bears' heads moved together, tracking whatever followed him. Eli turned fast and swept his arms through empty air. One bear growled. The sound traveled around the circle as other animals responded, a low vibration passing from one throat to the next. The old reel-to-reel recorder started by itself. Its speaker played Sienna's voice from headquarters. She was not speaking over our radios. The tape repeated a sentence she had said more than 4 hours earlier when we reviewed the first image. "Which one is Mara?" My duplicate answered from the storm. "The one you let out." She became visible between gusts. At first I saw only the uniform. Then the face resolved, calm and familiar, approaching with both hands open. Eli and Jonah moved beside me. The copy stopped 10 feet away. Without the distortion of a camera, the resemblance was even more complete. Her pupils contracted in the available light. A pulse moved in her neck. Blood from the cheek scratch had dried in the same shape as mine. She was not a transparent figure or a rough imitation. She looked like a human being who expected us to acknowledge an administrative mistake. "Aaron is coming back," she said. "There's room for all 4. My radio remained silent. The voice came directly from her. I asked what she wanted. "To finish the response." "What response?" She smiled. "The one you started when you looked at me." Female 840 took one step forward. The copy glanced toward her and lost the smile. That was the first reaction I trusted. I moved left. The copy matched me. The bear tracked the copy, not me. I moved back. Again, 840's nose and eyes followed the other woman. Jonah saw it too. "The bears know which one wasn't here before," he said. The copy looked at him. "They know which one belongs inside." 840 charged. The duplicate ran toward us. I expected impact, but she passed between Eli and me without touching either of us. Cold moved through my body, as if I had stepped into deep water. For a moment I remembered events that had not happened. Waking alone on the Brooks platform, walking across the river without sinking, hearing thousands of voices beneath the falls. The bear struck the copy from behind. Her body came apart without blood. Uniform fabric folded around a human shape for less than a second, then collapsed into a cloud of warm ash. The badge with my number landed on the ground. 840 swiped through the remaining dust, roaring at something we could no longer see. Around the circle, other bears charged inward. They did not converge on us. Each attacked a different point in empty air. Shapes appeared briefly where claws passed. A man in a geological field coat, a child wearing clothes from no decade I could identify. Eli holding his missing camera. Jonah with his eyes closed, and several figures too incomplete to have faces. Each collapsed when struck. Ash filled the air with the smell of hot metal and wet fur. The old recorder spoke over the noise. "There are 3 now." The bears stopped. One by one, they turned outward. The ring opened. Jonah's collar map showed 12 tracks moving away from marker 9. Female 840 remained near the trench for several seconds, breathing hard. She looked at me once, not with recognition, but with the ordinary caution of a wild bear evaluating a person. Then she followed the others into the storm. The temperature inside the ring dropped 20 degrees in less than a minute. Wind returned. Sound from the helicopter reached us from the south. Aaron could not land at marker 9, so she sat down on the same gravel bench outside the former perimeter. This time our compass route worked. The orange flags stood where we had placed them, forming a straight line to the ridge. No duplicates waited ahead. The survey post receded normally behind us. We carried the old recorder, and both duplicate badges. We left the buried station housing in place for a later team. None of us wanted to spend another minute deciding what else counted as evidence. At the landing zone, Aaron kept the rotor turning. Visibility was deteriorating again. We loaded equipment, climbed aboard, and lifted toward King Salmon. The helicopter's weight system issued a caution before we cleared the bench. Aaron had entered passenger and cargo weights before departure. The aircraft now behaved as if we carried an additional 146 pounds. She asked whether we had recovered heavy equipment. The recorder and samples together weighed less than 30. We checked the cabin. 3 passengers sat behind Aaron: Eli, Jonah, and me. No hidden cargo explained the difference. Aaron recalculated and kept the flight within safe limits. The caution remained for 12 minutes. During that time, the empty seat beside me compressed slowly, as if someone were sitting on the cushion. The shoulder harness lifted from the wall and settled across nothing. I did not look at it through a camera. Jonah watched the floor. Eli closed his eyes. The seat stayed occupied until we crossed the park boundary. Then the cushion rose, the harness fell loose, and the weight warning cleared. Nobody spoke for the rest of the flight. At headquarters, Sienna met us in the equipment bay. She had shut down every camera in the building, including security feeds, exactly as ordered. She counted us before opening the door. The action might sound irrational, but I was grateful for it. Eli's missing body camera sat in its charging cradle. He had carried the empty mount back from Marker 9. No one had placed the unit there. Its casing was warm and packed with fine gray ash around the battery door. The camera contained 4 hours of footage. The first segment showed the Brooks Falls platform from a ranger's chest height. My duplicate walked to the rail and looked into the fixed camera. The footage then cut to Marker 9 before our helicopter arrived. The viewpoint stood beside the survey post, watching the bears assemble on distant ridges. At one point, the camera turned toward the ash and recorded my duplicate badge rising slowly from the ground. The next segment showed us crossing the ring. The camera moved close behind me, sometimes no more than inches from my shoulder. Whenever one of us turned, the image dropped to the ground or moved behind another person. That explained why the copy could photograph us without being seen. It did not explain how an object had held and moved the camera. The final segment came from inside the helicopter. The body camera rested in the empty 4th seat, facing the 3 of us. Its timestamp covered the 12 minutes of unexplained wait. What? At first, the harness enclosed empty air. Then a shallow human outline appeared in the seat, visible only when light from the window changed. The outline gained detail with each passing minute. Uniform. Hands. Dark hair. Just before we crossed the boundary, a woman's face formed completely. It was not mine. It belonged to Sienna. The figure looked directly into the camera and raised one finger to her lips. Then the image cut to the charging cradle inside headquarters. Sienna was standing several feet away, watching us land through a window. She had never been to Marker 9. We evacuated the building until daylight and disabled the remaining camera network. Sienna underwent a medical examination. Nothing was wrong with her. She remembered no unusual sensation during the flight. For the next week, however, every radio she used opened with a fraction of her own voice, speaking before she pressed the transmit button. The investigation divided the incident into separate problems because no official process could hold them together. Information technology reviewed the Brooks feed and body camera files. Wildlife staff reviewed the collar movements. Aviation examined the weight discrepancy. Geology surveyed Marker 9. Law enforcement documented the duplicate badges and old recorder. Each group found evidence that its part had happened. The aviation review produced the detail I wish it had not. The helicopter's load system had sampled the unexplained weight continuously, rather than estimating it from flight performance. The additional load began at 143 pounds, increased in small steps as the outline formed on Eli's camera, and stabilized at 146 pounds just before we crossed the boundary. During her medical examination that afternoon, Sienna weighed 146 pounds in uniform. The empty seat had not merely carried an unknown passenger. It had become heavier as the image learned the body it was copying. The body camera's internal clock and location log made the sequence worse. It recorded Brooks Camp, Marker 9, and the helicopter cabin without gaps. Yet its GPS chip never moved from the charging cradle at headquarters. Battery diagnostics showed less than 20 minutes of power use across 4 hours of footage. Technicians replaced the battery and performed controlled tests. The fault never repeated. When they disconnected the camera from all networks and placed it inside a sealed evidence locker, it created one final image overnight. Sienna asleep at home, photographed from the foot of her bed. No camera was present in her house. The original camera stream showed no edit points, missing packets, or outside access. Facial comparison software matched the woman on the platform to me beyond the threshold used for identification. Voice analysis found no measurable difference between the radio transmission and my normal speech, except that the copied version contained frequencies below the response range of our handheld units. Both duplicate badges were made from the same alloy as authentic Park Service badges. Under magnification, mine carried scratches matching damage that occurred years apart. Eli's duplicate showed a fresh scrape his real badge did not receive until the following month, when he caught it on a storage cabinet. The laboratory could not explain that sequence. The duplicate badges gradually lost mass after collection. Within 6 weeks, only stamped shells of compacted volcanic ash remained in the evidence bags. The recorder was genuinely old. Tape composition and paper aging were consistent with the late 1960s. The field crew existed, and their equipment loss report was real. 3 surviving family members confirmed that one geologist had left Alaska shortly after the incident and refused to be photographed for the rest of his life. Geologists excavated the monitoring station after the weather cleared. The housing extended only 2 feet into the ash. No chamber heat source, buried machinery, or human remains lay beneath it. Ground temperature at Marker 9 matched the surrounding valley. The compasses worked normally. Walking away from the post led exactly where it should. The bears returned to ordinary behavior within hours. Several traveled back toward salmon streams. Others dispersed into higher country. None showed injuries consistent with attacking solid animals. The female 840 had gray ash embedded beneath 2 claws. The material matched deposits at Marker 9, but contained microscopic fibers from my uniform shirt. Our final report attributed the gathering to an unidentified attractant, and the video to sophisticated interference. Nobody involved believed those explanations. They were labels for the absence of explanations, written carefully enough to allow the file to close. Marker 9 was removed from public and internal navigation layers. The area was placed under a research closure using unstable volcanic deposits as justification. That danger is real. It is simply not the danger that keeps me away. Eli transferred to another park the next spring. Jonah continued the bear study but changed one protocol. When multiple animals converge without a visible food source, field teams review telemetry without opening any live camera. Sienna stayed at headquarters. She covers every lens in the radio room during overnight shifts. I kept working bear management. The incident did not transform the animals into something mystical for me. Their behavior remained readable. They had smelled or seen something we could not. They had formed a boundary around it. When the copies multiplied, they removed them. That is not guardianship. It is an animal response to a threat humans had made worse by watching. What I cannot explain is why the first copy chose my face. Perhaps it selected the person watching the camera. Perhaps uniform and authority mattered. Maybe my copied voice asked not to cross the bears, because some part of it already understood the rule. I have considered every version. None accounts for Sienna's face forming inside the helicopter after the original copy collapsed. The Brooks cameras returned to service the following summer. For months, nothing unusual appeared. Bears fished below the falls. Visitors filled the platforms. Rangers enforced distance rules and answered the same questions we answer every season. Then, shortly after midnight on a clear August night, motion detection activated the upper platform camera. The platform itself was empty. In the river below, the infrared reflection showed a woman standing at the rail. She had Sienna's face and wore my uniform. Eli's body camera hung from her chest. In one hand, she held a crumbling badge. In the other, a brown bear collar. Every bear in the river stopped fishing and looked up at the same time. The woman in the reflection raised her radio. Sienna and I were together in the operations room when both our radios opened. The voice belonged to neither of us anymore. It said, "There are 4 now." At 9:14, 2 climbers called from Intersection Rock. Because their 60-meter rope no longer reached the rappel anchor 30 feet below them. The route was only 2 pitches. From the parking area, our laser rangefinder placed their headlamps more than 400 feet above the desert, while the actual summit was clearly visible beneath their boots. A third light was descending toward them from open sky. No aircraft, rope, or climber was above it. When that light reached their ledge, both men went silent. Then one whispered that the parking lot was directly over his head. We looked up and saw our own headlights moving across the darkness above them. My name is Caleb Ward. I worked climbing patrol and technical rescue at Joshua Tree for 13 years. Before that, I guided rock routes in California and Nevada, which means most of my useful knowledge concerns friction, rope systems, human fatigue, and gravity. Those are dependable things. Rock may fracture. Gear may fail. People may misjudge distance or overestimate their ability. Gravity does not become uncertain because the sun goes down. That belief survived until the night Intersection Rock acquired more height than it possessed. Joshua Tree is an old-school climbing destination. Routes can be stiff for their grade, protection may be sparse, and fixed hardware is not something the Park Service inspects or guarantees. Climbers are expected to understand anchors, tie knots and rope ends, carry enough equipment, and prepare for self-rescue. Josar, our search and rescue team, trains for vertical incidents, but a rescue is never immediate or certain. Cell service fails in much of the park. At Intersection Rock, an emergency phone beside the parking area gives climbers one reliable way to call for help. The first report came through that phone shortly before 9. A climber named Owen Laird had remained on the ground while his partners, Martin Shaw and Dev Patel, finished a familiar 2-pitch route under headlamps. Owen had injured a finger earlier and decided not to climb. He watched Martin and Dev reach the upper section, heard them build an anchor, and expected to see them rappel within minutes. Instead, their lights continued upward. At first, he assumed they had traversed across the top. But then both headlamps rose beyond the formation's silhouette. Owen carried a small 2-way radio paired with Martin's. When he asked what they were doing, Martin said they were still on the second pitch. He could feel rock beneath both hands and boots. The crack continued above him. He had not reached the summit. Owen could see the summit below Martin's light. Dispatch sent the initial call as an overdue climbing party with possible route confusion. I was finishing paperwork at the Indian Cove Ranger Station when the page came through. Rena Patel, a Joser team leader with more rescue experience than some full-time rangers, met me at the equipment cache. We loaded static ropes, edge protection, anchor gear, medical equipment, and portable scene lights. 2 additional team members, Luke Emery and Jean Alvarez, responded directly to Intersection Rock. The drive was clear and cold. Wind moved steadily from the west, but the forecast showed no storm. A half-moon hung above the granite formations. I remember that because it cast clean shadows across the desert, making distance easier to judge, Then, on a moonless night, we reached the parking area at 9:14. Owen stood beside the emergency phone, holding his radio. Luke and Jean had already established a perimeter and moved visitors away from the base. Intersection. Rock looked exactly as it should. A large Monza granite formation rising beside the parking area, summit outlined against the sky. 2 headlamps shone far above it. They were not stars. They moved independently, sweeping across something our scene lights could not reveal. When Martin shifted his beam, it traced a pale vertical surface for several yards before darkness absorbed it. Dev's light remained lower and slightly right. I used a laser rangefinder from 3 positions. The instrument returned inconsistent measurements to the formation itself, varying by only a few feet as expected from angle. Measurements to the headlamps ranged between 400 and 430 feet above our position. Intersection rock did not have that height. More importantly, open air occupied the space where the lights moved. Rena aimed a high-powered spotlight upward. The beam passed through the location without revealing rock, rope, or bodies. Martin radioed immediately that a bright light had appeared beneath them. Beneath? I asked. Coming out of the crack below my feet. From the ground, our spotlight pointed directly at him from below. In Martin's position, the same beam emerged from the rock as if the parking area lay behind the wall. I asked him to describe his anchor. 2 medium cams in a horizontal crack, backed up by a nut. Both climbers were tied in. Their 60-meter rope ran down the route to the rappel anchor they had used on previous climbs. They could see that anchor 30 feet below, but when they pulled the rope, more than half its length hung beneath it without reaching any surface they recognized. That was the first mathematical impossibility. A 60-meter rope cannot place 2 climbers more than 400 feet above its lower end. Rope stretches under load, but not by hundreds of feet. Either their description was wrong, our measurements were wrong, or distance between the climbers and the ground no longer meant the same thing along the route. I told Martin and Dev to remain anchored, conserve batteries, and avoid moving higher. Both responded clearly. They were frightened but coherent. Neither reported injury. Then a third light appeared above them. It descended slowly, pausing every few yards like a climber making controlled rappels. Through binoculars I could see a cone of white light, but no person holding it. No rope extended above. The night sky remained visible around it. Martin saw the light approaching from what he called below. Dev insisted it came from above. They argued until it reached their position. Both radios went silent. We called repeatedly. After nearly a minute, Dev answered in a whisper. He said the third light had stopped beside their anchor. Nothing held it. The headlamp floated at chest height, its strap closed as if wrapped around a head. Behind it, where the rock should have been, Dev could see the intersection rock parking area. He could see us standing around the trucks, but the vehicles hung above him, tires facing the sky. Owen looked upward at that exact moment. His face lost color. Above Martin and Dev, several pairs of headlights moved across a flat, dark surface. They followed the same positions as our parked vehicles, including my rescue truck with its amber beacon rotating. The parking area had appeared twice, once beneath the real formation and again in the sky above the climbers. We shifted from assessment to rescue. Luke and Jean prepared a top access system from the actual summit. Rena and I would climb the route from below, maintaining a continuous main line to the ground. A vertical rescue at night is already complex. We simplified wherever possible. Redundant anchors, fixed communication intervals, explicit rope lengths, and written timestamps. If distance was unreliable, documentation had to be better than memory. Owen gave us Martin's route description. It was a standard 2-pitch line using crack protection, with a broad ledge below the final section and an easy scramble from the summit. He and his partners had climbed it several times. Nothing about the route should have required more than a single 60-meter rope for descent using the established stations. Luke reached the summit by the walk-off and radioed from directly below the two headlamps. He could hear voices overhead but saw only sky. He lowered a weighted line from the summit edge. The rope fell normally toward the parking area. When he swung it toward Martin's position, the lower end curved upward. The rope formed a smooth arc, passed over the summit, and rose into darkness without support. Luke released more line. It continued upward until all 300 feet left the bag. The end never reached Martin. From the ground, we saw Luke's rope rise like a cable pulled into the sky. The line became taut. End-to-line. Something above had taken its weight. Luke clipped the rope to his anchor and attached a load cell. It registered 180 pounds, close to the weight of an adult climber with equipment. Martin and Dev remained on their own anchor. Neither had touched Luke's line. The load increased by another 160 pounds. Then, another. 3 separate weights now hung on a rope whose end had never reached a visible person. Rena cut the system loose before the summit anchor could be overloaded. The line did not fall. It remained suspended above the rock for several seconds, coiling slowly in empty air. Then it dropped in one mass onto the summit, all 300 feet cold and wet. There was no water anywhere on the formation. Rena and I started climbing at 9:48. The lower route felt normal. Monza granite crystals pressed rough beneath my gloves. Wind moved across my back. Chalk marks and placements matched Owen's description. I led while Rena followed with the rescue line and additional hardware. The ground crew measured every foot of rope we used. At the first belay, we had climbed 86 feet. My altimeter agreed within a few feet. GPS placed us on the formation. Martin's light remained impossibly high above. The second pitch ended at the actual summit. I pulled onto the top and stood beside Luke. The parking lot spread below in the correct direction. Rena joined us. Our instruments placed our elevation exactly where park maps said it should be. Martin and Dev's voices came from a crack at my feet. I knelt and looked into it. The opening was less than an inch wide. Far below, 2 headlamps moved against a vertical rock face. They looked hundreds of feet away. At the same time, Owen shouted from the parking area. The climbers were still visible in the sky above us. They occupied both directions at once. Rena lowered a small weighted line into the crack. It fell 20 feet, stopped, and pulled sideways. On the ground, John watched the same cord emerge from empty air above the summit and rise toward the climbers. The route did not continue beyond the rock. It continued through it. I clipped into the summit anchor and fed myself into the crack. My shoulders should not have fit. The opening widened around the helmet without any rock breaking. One moment I was lying on the summit with desert wind across my legs. The next I was standing on a vertical wall under a black sky, attached to a rope that entered solid stone beneath my boots. The actual summit hung above my head like a ceiling. Rena came through after me. Our radios filled with the sound of carabiners striking rock somewhere higher in the dark. I had entered many narrow chimneys and squeezed passages, but this was not a physical opening through granite. The summit crack had become a boundary. Behind us, a slit of moonlit desert remained visible, no wider than my hand. Ahead stood a wall that our eyes accepted as vertical, even though our bodies disagreed. My harness pulled toward the rock. Loose carabiners hung at a 40-degree angle, pointing into it rather than toward the ground. Rena unclipped a steel nut and released it. The nut fell 6 inches toward the wall, stopped without touching, and dropped upward past her shoulder. Its cable flashed once in her headlamp before disappearing. Luke saw the same nut emerge from the crack on the summit. It rose into the sky and did not return. We established a new anchor immediately inside the boundary. One rope remained fixed to the real summit. A second would connect us to Martin and Dev. Rena marked the transition point with reflective tape and recorded the exact time. We agreed that neither of us would unclip from both systems for any reason. The rock ahead resembled the upper pitch we had just climbed, but details were wrong. Crystals were sharper. Light and vanished. Chalk marks appeared beneath a thin skin of stone, visible as pale shapes several millimeters below the surface. When I placed a cam in a familiar crack, its lobes touched another cam already buried deep inside the granite. I worked it free with a nut tool. The old device was a rigid stem cam from decades earlier. Its sling had rotted almost through. A name was written on the metal in faded ink. E. Halpern. Luke checked the rescue archive. Evan Halpern had survived a nighttime fall at Intersection Rock in the late 1980s. His report mentioned losing several pieces of protection during the rescue. It did not mention climbing above the summit. We continued toward the voices. Movement could not be described honestly as up or down. We climbed in the direction our hands interpreted as upward, following cracks and the pull of Martin's radio signal. Our altimeters remained at summit elevation. GPS showed no movement. The ground team paid out rope continuously. After what felt like a full pitch, Jean reported that only 22 feet had passed through the summit anchor. The wall beside us held more than 100 feet of new protection. I counted placements, measured body lengths, and checked the rope marks. Our physical travel was real. The distance connecting us to the summit was not accumulating at the same rate. Every few minutes, the duplicate parking lot appeared through gaps in the darkness. Headlights traveled overhead. Tiny figures moved around the vehicles. Their actions matched the ground team but occurred in reverse order. Jean would cross from the rescue truck to Owen, and several seconds beforehand, the overhead version of Jean walked backward from Owen to the truck. Rena stopped looking at it. "It isn't showing where they are," she said. "It's showing where they just stopped being." Martin answered our next radio call. He said Dev had injured his right hand when the third light struck their anchor. Dev remained conscious, but he had begun repeating questions. Martin estimated our lights were 50 feet away. From our position, his voice sounded close enough to come from behind the next bulge. His headlamp remained a distant point. We rounded the bulge and found the same section of rock again. My new cam sat in the crack ahead of me, though it remained clipped to the rope behind. For several yards, the route duplicated itself. Each hold, crystal, and shallow scar appeared twice, connected end to end. The second version was older. Chalk had darkened. Metal showed corrosion. At the next repetition, the rock was cleaner and the hardware newer. We were climbing through different ages of the same pitch. The third headlamp descended between them. It floated close enough for me to see its elastic strap closed around empty space. The plastic housing was yellowed, an older model that used a bulky battery pack. No cable connected the lamp to a pack. Light continued to burn. Rena caught the strap with a sling. The headlamp resisted like a weighted object, pulling toward the duplicated wall. She secured it to our anchor and turned the switch. Nothing changed. She opened the battery compartment. It contained packed desert sand. The beam rotated toward my face. Light struck my eyes, and the route changed. For 1 second, I stood in the Intersection Rock parking area in daylight. Visitors crossed between cars. Owen spoke into the emergency phone, but no sound emerged. Above the formation, 4 climbers hung in open air. Martin, Dev, Rena, and me. A 5th person climbed down toward us wearing an old Joser helmet. Then, darkness returned. My right foot had slipped. I hung on the rope with one glove torn and blood running across 2 knuckles. Rena pulled me back to the stance. She cut the headlamp sling and let it go. The light fell upward. It passed Martin and Dev's visible position without illuminating them. It continued toward the inverted parking area and became indistinguishable from the headlights. Jean reported that one of our actual truck headlights had failed at the same moment. We reached the climbers at 10:56. They occupied a ledge barely wide enough for 4 people. Martin had built a solid anchor using cams and a large stopper. Dev sat clipped near the wall, holding his injured hand. His helmet was cracked, but he had no obvious head wound. Both men were cold, dehydrated, and frightened in a way experienced climbers rarely admit while still on the wall. Their 60-meter rope disappeared over the ledge in both directions. Martin had pulled the center mark to his anchor. 30 meters ran toward the original rappel station. 30 meters ran toward the parking lot overhead. Neither end was visible. The rope had divided itself into 2 full-length halves that each continued farther than the entire rope. Rena assessed Dev. 2 fingers were likely broken. His repeated questions came from panic and exhaustion rather than a clear neurological injury. We gave him water, insulated him, and attached both climbers to our rescue system. Martin described how the route changed. He and Dev had reached the second pitch anchor shortly after sunset. When they looked up, the crack continued for perhaps 20 feet beyond the usual finish. They assumed they had stopped below the summit and climbed on. After another 20 feet, the summit appeared below them. They tried to descend, but the rappel anchor remained the same short distance away no matter how much rope they fed. The third light arrived later. Each time it passed their ledge, the crack gained another section. "It isn't a climber," Martin said. "It's measuring us." I asked what he meant. He pointed to a series of shallow holes in the wall. At first they looked like natural pockets. Their spacing matched the positions of his last 6 protection placements. When he removed a cam, a metal shape remained inside the stone. The route copied every piece of gear, then repeated the distance between them. Our own placements had been teaching it too. That explained why the duplicate pitch grew longer after we entered. Every anchor and measured interval gave the space another unit to reproduce. Our precautions had made the route more stable. Rena radioed the ground team and ordered them to stop feeding rope. We removed every unnecessary piece of protection from the ledge and converted the system to the fewest possible anchors. I tied the 4 of us together at fixed intervals, using one main line back to the summit boundary. When Jean locked the ground rope, the wall trembled. The duplicated crack ahead began losing detail. Crystals softened. Old cams sank deeper into the surface. The inverted parking area flickered overhead. We started back. Descending should have followed our rope directly to the boundary. Instead, the line split at the first repeated pitch. One strand entered the older wall. Another continued through the newer version. Both carried equal tension. Neither could exist, because we had only one rope. I clipped a load meter to each apparent strand. The newer route carried the combined weight of the ground anchor and 4 rescuers. The older route carried an additional 170 pounds. Someone else was attached to our system. Carabiners clicked in the darkness behind Martin. The old headlamp returned, descending toward us. Beneath it hung the outline of a harness. A helmet formed above the lamp as it approached, followed by shoulders inside a faded red rescue jacket. Luke recognized the jacket from my description. Josar had issued that color to volunteers in the 1990s. The figure stopped at the fork in our rope. Its face remained turned toward the wall. One gloved hand held the older strand. Rena asked Luke to search the archive for rescuer fatalities or disappearances at Intersection Rock. There were none. Everyone involved in Evan Halpern's rescue had returned. Then Owen spoke over the radio. He knew the jacket. It belonged to his father, Stephen Laird, who had volunteered with Josar before Owen was born. Stephen had not died in the park. He was alive in Arizona, retired from climbing after a rescue at Intersection Rock left him with recurring vertigo. Owen had brought his father's old headlamp on the trip and left it in the rescue truck as a good luck token. Jean checked the cab. The headlamp was gone. The figure on the route turned toward us. There was no body inside the helmet and jacket. The clothing held volume, bent at joints, and pulled on the rope, but darkness occupied the face opening. It began climbing hand over hand toward our group. We could not retreat while the rope remained divided. Cutting the wrong strand might detach us from the real summit. Waiting would allow the route to copy more distance and perhaps more of us. Rena took a plumb bob from her rigging kit. She used it for checking litter orientation during high-angle evacuations. She released the weight between the two strands. It did not follow either route. The bob swung sideways and pointed into blank space between them. The real line was where no rope appeared. I reached into that darkness and felt tension against my glove. An invisible rope ran directly toward the summit boundary. The two visible strands were copies, complete enough to carry weight, but not connected to the ground. We transferred our attachments one at a time to the line we could feel but not see. The empty rescue suit reached the ledge as I moved Dev. It extended one glove toward his shoulder. Martin struck the arm with a carabiner. Fabric folded flat for a moment, then refilled. The headlamp brightened, projecting another version of the route beyond us. Rena pulled the sand-filled battery compartment open and drove her knife through the lamp housing. The beam went out. Every artificial light in the parking area failed with it. Darkness became complete. Our headlamps, radios, screens, vehicle lights, and the amber beacon below all died together. The route did not become darker in the ordinary sense. It lost visual existence. I could feel rock beneath one boot and tension in my harness, but I could no longer tell where the wall ended or open air began. Rena's voice came from inches away. Hands on the real line. Nobody reaches for light. We clipped short tethers between each person so separation would be physically impossible. Rena went first, following the invisible rope by touch. Dev moved behind her with his injured hand secured against his chest. Martin followed Dev. I remained last, keeping the system weighted and feeling for the empty rescue suit. Without sight, distance behaved differently. The next anchor arrived after 6 hand movements. The one after that required more than 50. Rope marks beneath my glove repeated at irregular intervals. Sometimes I felt 2 identical knots where we had tied only one. Rena tested each by pulling in both directions, and followed whichever connection transferred Luke's voice through the line as vibration. Our radios still transmitted audio even though their displays were dead. Luke gave us a steady count from the summit. Main line holding, 4-person load, boundary secure. Every few seconds another voice repeated him from somewhere behind me. Boundary secure, 5-person load. Luke's load cell showed the same change. The extra 170 pounds had transferred to the invisible rope with us. Something gripped the line below my hand. I felt a glove slide over the sheath. It moved without friction, passed through my fingers, and continued toward Martin. I struck at it with the flat of my palm. Fabric compressed against the rope, but no bones resisted underneath. The hand released and caught the back of my harness. My body became heavier. Luke reported a sudden increase to more than 300 pounds beyond our expected load. The empty suit was no longer climbing beside us. It was wearing my system from behind. I could not cut it loose without finding the connection. I ran one hand along my harness. Every carabiner felt duplicated. 2 belay loops occupied the same place. 2 knots connected my tether. One set was warm from my body. The other was cold and damp. I followed the cold knot into darkness and found a rope leading away from the main line. The copied strand pulsed with the rhythm of breathing. I cut it. The blade passed through under tension. A sound like a long exhale moved across the wall. The additional load vanished from Luke's meter. Something fell away behind me, striking protection at increasing intervals. The impacts continued far longer than the height of the route allowed. Then, a headlamp switched on below. The sand-filled light receded into the distance, illuminating the empty helmet and red jacket as they fell. The figure became smaller, past the location where the real parking area should have been, and continued until it resembled a star beneath my boots. The darkness folded over it. Our headlamps remained dead, but the route began contracting around the real rope. Old anchors passed beneath our hands in rapid succession. Metal from different decades struck together. I felt the rigid stem cam marked with Evan Halpern's name slide past my wrist, followed by modern devices, pitons, wooden wedges, and pieces of hardware I could not identify by touch. All had been embedded in repeated versions of the same crack. Now the repetitions were collapsing into one. Rena reached the summit boundary first. She described a narrow opening with cold air beyond it. Luke could hear her voice through the crack at his feet. He and John established a haul system, and we transferred Dev through first. His injured hand cleared. Then his shoulders entered the opening. The crack tightened around his harness. For several seconds, Dev existed on both sides. Luke could see his helmet emerging onto the summit. I could still feel his full weight on the impossible wall. The route tried to retain the measured distance between us, stretching his tether even though neither end moved. Martin untied the fixed interval knot connecting him to Dev. The moment that unit of distance disappeared, Dev slid through the boundary and landed beside Luke. We understood the pattern. Every marked length stabilized the route. Knots, protection intervals, rope centers, measured pitches. To collapse it, we had to remove the divisions it was copying. Martin untied from our shared tether and transferred directly to the haul line. Rena stripped the remaining reflective markers. I removed protection behind us until only one anchor remained. Ground staff stopped calling distance and load numbers over the radio. They spoke only names and actions. Martin passed through next. Rena followed. I remained alone on the other side with one anchor, one rope, and no measured interval to another person. The route reacted immediately. Rock moved beneath my hands like something breathing under fabric. The crack widened, then narrowed. The duplicate parking area appeared in flashes above and below. Headlights returned one at a time. In each version, a rescue team stood around a rope leading into the sky. Some teams wore current uniforms. Others wore equipment from earlier decades. Several parking lots were empty, except for an emergency phone ringing beside the restroom. The third headlamp rose toward me again. This time, a face occupied the helmet. It was my face, older by perhaps 20 years. Eyes closed beneath a coating of pale dust. The figure wore my harness and every piece of equipment I still carried. One hand held the line above me. The other reached toward the last anchor. If it clipped in, the route would have another complete measurement to reproduce. I removed the anchor. For the first time that night, I was attached only to the rope running through the boundary. Luke and John took my weight. The wall disappeared from beneath my boots. I fell sideways. The direction changed twice during the fall. My shoulder struck granite. My helmet hit something metallic. For an instant, I saw the entire formation below me. Summit and parking area laid flat like a photograph. Above it rose a column of repeated rock, each pitch containing a different rescue, a different climber, and a different light descending toward the same ledge. Then the haul line tightened. Luke pulled me through the summit crack as it closed around my left boot. Rena cut the bootlace and tore the shoe free. The rock sealed before the boot emerged. I lay on top of intersection rock under an ordinary night sky. The formation ended beneath me. Wind moved from the west. The parking area occupied its proper place below. All vehicle lights came back at once. The 2 headlamps above the summit were gone. A third light remained for several seconds. It descended slowly through empty air, reached the silhouette of the rock, and vanished. We lowered Dev and Martin from the actual summit using a conventional system. The distance matched the route guide. The ropes behaved normally. Owen met his partners at the base shortly before midnight. Dev went by ambulance for fractured fingers and observation. Martin had no physical injuries beyond dehydration and abrasions. Rena and I descended last. My missing boot was waiting beside the emergency phone. It stood upright on the pavement, still tied. The leather was wet. Inside it rested the rigid stem cam engraved with Evan Halpern's name, and a folded strip of faded red fabric from Stephen Laird's old rescue jacket. Owen checked the truck cab. His father's headlamp had returned to the dashboard. Its housing was split where Rena's knife had struck it. The battery compartment contained desert sand. The lamp continued to glow for 9 minutes after we removed it from the truck, then went dark permanently. We closed the formation until daylight and documented everything before exhaustion altered our memories. Laser rangefinder files preserved the impossible measurements. Radio recordings captured Martin and Dev describing the inverted parking lot. Luke's load cell logged 3 adult weights on the upward rope, followed later by the extra load on our rescue line. 4 witnesses on the ground saw headlights moving above the climbers. The ropes provided the strongest physical evidence. Our main line measured exactly 300 feet after recovery. It had never been cut or joined. Yet the sheath carried more than 600 feet of abrasion when technicians mapped the damaged sections. One of our Norwadrai warranty the damaged sheath. Cut. Wear patterns repeated every 22 feet with microscopic precision. Each repetition contained the same granite dust and the same trace of rust from an old anchor. The rope had passed over one short piece of rock many times while we experienced it as a long rope. Martin and Dev's 60-meter rope was also intact. Both ends remained tied with stopper knots. Its center mark appeared in 7 locations. Chemical testing showed that the additional marks were not ink applied later. Each was the original factory die occupying a different section of sheath. Owen had recorded nearly the entire response from the parking area on his phone. The video removed any possibility that the 4 ground witnesses had simply misjudged stars or distant aircraft. It showed Martin and Dev's lights moving above the formation, while the summit remained visible beneath them. When the duplicate parking area appeared, the camera captured our headlights traveling across the sky in the exact pattern of vehicles below. Frame analysis found no reflection surface, cloud layer, or lens artifact. The overhead lights changed position several seconds before the real vehicles made the corresponding movement. One section of Owen's recording showed Rena and me after we entered the summit crack. Our bodies vanished from the top, but our shadows remained on the face of intersection rock. Walk. The shadows continued climbing for more than 400 feet beyond the edge of the stone. A 5th shadow followed. It wore a rescue helmet and carried a headlamp at chest level. When Rena destroyed that lamp inside the route, the 5th shadow broke apart, and every powered light in the parking area failed within the same video frame. Technicians inspected the trucks, scene lights, radios, and personal headlamps. Bulbs, batteries, fuses, and wiring were undamaged. Devices from different manufacturers had shut down simultaneously without receiving a common signal. Their internal logs recorded manual power commands, as though someone had pressed every switch, Nobody had. Several lights returned with their brightness controls turned in the opposite direction from the physical knobs. Dev's climbing watch added another contradiction. Its barometric sensor showed no increase beyond the known summit elevation, agreeing with mine. Its motion tracker recorded more than 800 vertical feet after he should have stopped climbing. Martin's phone counted enough steps for nearly half a mile, although he never left the wall. Both devices placed them within 20 feet of the real summit for the entire incident. The boot that appeared beside the emergency phone had never been untied. The cut lace remained threaded through every eyelet and fused together at the damaged point, as if exposed briefly to high heat. Its sole carried continuous abrasion across a distance, a laboratory estimated at several thousand feet of rough rock. I had worn that pair for less than a year. More disturbing was the material beneath the insole, small flakes of reflective tape identical to the markers Rena removed during our descent. Some pieces were trapped below factory adhesive and could not have entered after manufacture. The evidence did not prove where we had gone. It proved that distance, sequence, and containment had stopped agreeing while we were there. My altimeter recorded no elevation gain after reaching the summit. GPS kept me within a circle less than 20 feet across. The medical monitor on my wrist showed sustained exertion consistent with several hours of climbing. Dust in my clothing included Monza granite crystals with sharp, unweathered surfaces, as though freshly broken from deep inside the formation. No cavity existed beneath the summit crack. Geologists used acoustic testing and ground-penetrating radar where the formation allowed it. Where solid rock extended below. The inch-wide opening I had entered did not widen, flex, or connect to another space. My boot could not have passed through it, much less 4 people with rescue equipment. Evan Halpern identified the old cam. He remembered placing it during his accident in the late 1980s. He also remembered something omitted from the official report. While waiting for rescue after dark, he saw headlamps climbing above the summit. His rescuers reached him by following a rope through a crack that looked too narrow to enter. Everyone involved agreed afterward to describe the event as disorientation caused by pain medication and darkness. Stephen Laird told us a similar story. During a later rescue, he had seen the parking lot overhead and lost his red jacket and headlamp on what he believed was a third pitch. The operation lasted less than an hour, according to ground staff. Stephen remembered climbing for most of the night. He stopped volunteering because every tall wall afterward made him feel that the ground was waiting above him. Neither man knew the other had experienced it. The park's final report separated our incident into equipment anomalies, optical misjudgment, and stress responses. Intersection. Rock reopened after an inspection found no unstable stone. That decision was defensible. Thousands of climbers have used the formation safely before, and since. Closing a major climbing area indefinitely requires more than a story no survey can reproduce. We changed our rescue procedures quietly. On nighttime vertical calls at Intersection Rock, teams now establish 1 master distance from the ground and avoid announcing repeated measurements over open radio. We do not aim multiple scene lights at the summit from opposing angles. If a rope curves upward without support, nobody clips it to an anchor. A small plumb bob stays in the primary rigging bag. Those rules have never appeared in a public climbing notice. Writing them honestly would require us to explain what they prevent. Martin returned to climbing but stopped using center-marked ropes. Dev recovered movement in his hand and never climbed after sunset again. Owen gave his father's headlamp to our evidence room. The cracked unit occasionally accumulates fresh sand beneath its empty battery cover. Nobody tests the switch. Rena remained with Joser for another 6 years. We worked many vertical rescues together. None broke distance the way that route did. Whenever a subject reported being farther from an anchor than the rope allowed, She asked one question before discussing equipment. "And can you still see the summit below you?" Most climbers thought it was a joke. I left Joshua Tree after my 13th season. My reasons were ordinary: family, fatigue, and an administrative position in another district. I still climb occasionally, but I stop before dark. I do not continue beyond a finish, I recognize, even when the crack appears to offer another perfect sequence of holds. Before I transferred, we conducted one controlled daylight test. A survey team measured the formation from 6 fixed stations, while Joser lowered an unmarked rope from the summit. Every distance was normal. At sunset, we switched on a single headlamp at the upper anchor. The rope's shadow rose past the summit and continued across empty sky, though the physical rope hung to the ground. When a second light was aimed from the parking area, the shadow developed a center mark that the real rope did not have. We ended the test without adding a third light. For 17 minutes afterward, the emergency phone displayed an incoming call from its own number. Nobody answered it. That test never entered the public report. It proved the incident could begin again and that our attempt to reproduce it was already teaching the formation new measurements. We stopped experimenting. Rena later admitted that the plumb bob from the rescue never hung straight again. In every other location, it leaned a few degrees toward Joshua Tree, even inside buildings and hundreds of miles away. She finally sealed it in the same evidence cabinet as Stephen's headlamp. When the two objects were placed on the same shelf, the distance between them increased by half an inch overnight, although neither had moved. 3 months after the rescue, dispatch received a call from the emergency phone at Intersection Rock at 9:14 in the evening. The parking area camera showed nobody near it. The operator heard only wind and metal striking rock. Then a man gave my name and asked for 300 feet of static rope. I was at home when it happened. The operator asked where he was located. The caller answered, "At the bottom of the third pitch." Intersection Rock still has only 2. Before the line disconnected, another voice spoke behind him. It belonged to Rena. She said, "Don't measure how far we have left." At 1:26 in the morning, the Coast Guard received an identification signal from a passenger steamer crossing Frozen Lake Superior at 12 knots. The vessel was the Maribel, which had sunk near Outer Island in 1927. Its wreck still lay 300 feet down. The new track moved beneath 14 inches of unbroken ice toward the mainland sea caves. When it passed below us, a ship's horn sounded through our boots and every compass needle pointed straight down. Frost cleared in a window around my feet. A brightly lit passenger deck moved beneath the ice, upside down, and everyone behind its windows was looking up at me. My name is Nora Hale. I worked winter operations at Apostle Island's National Lakeshore for 9 years. The most important thing we told visitors was also the thing many did not want to hear. Ice is never completely safe. Cold weather does not create certainty. Wind can push water beneath a frozen surface. Waves can weaken it from below. Pressure cracks open, close, and move. Conditions that look solid in the morning may become deadly by afternoon. Park staff monitor the mainland ice caves when conditions begin to attract visitors. We measure thickness, examine satellite imagery, watch wind direction, and check how the lake has behaved over time. A low-risk assessment is not a promise. It is a temporary judgment made with limited information about one of the largest and least forgiving freshwater systems in the world. The night the Maribel returned came during an unusually stable cold spell. The nearshore lake had frozen early. Temperatures remained below zero for days. Our team had drilled more than 24 test holes between Myers Beach and the cave area. Most measured between 13 and 16 inches of clear ice over darker layers. We had not yet opened the area to the public because an offshore pressure ridge remained active, but the immediate shoreline zone looked better than it had in several winters. That afternoon, a photographer named Leah Monroe failed to return to her car. Leah was 34, experienced outdoors and familiar with winter travel. Her vehicle sat at the Myers Beach lot after sunset. A note on the dashboard listed the mainland caves as her destination. She had signed no permit because none was required for a shoreline hike, but her family expected a call by 6. When they heard nothing, they contacted local authorities. We searched the beach, trail, and accessible ice until wind increased. Her tracks left shore near the usual cave route. They continued for almost a mile, then ended at a line of wind-blown snow. No return prints appeared. A thermal drone found no heat source. By midnight, visibility fell below safe flying conditions, and we withdrew to the incident post while a smaller team monitored the shoreline. I was reviewing Leah's last known position with Ranger Marcus Bell when the Coast Guard called. The watchstander asked whether any commercial vessel had authorization to operate near the mainland caves. The question made no sense. Ice extended far beyond the nearshore zone. No ordinary vessel could reach us. An automatic identification signal had appeared north of Sand Island and was traveling southeast. The transmitted name was Maribel. Vessel type showed passenger steamer. Speed held at 12 knots. The signal passed through areas known to be frozen without slowing. Marcus assumed a spoofed transmitter carried by a snowmobile. AI's equipment can be misprogrammed or used for pranks. The Coast Guard had already considered that. Shore-based radar showed a moving return in the same position, long and narrow, approximately 200 feet from bow to stern. Infrared imagery showed no engine heat on the surface. The Maribel's transmitted registration belonged to a vessel lost almost a century earlier. The original ship was fictional, only in the sense that most people had forgotten it. Local maritime records documented the sinking. The Maribel carried freight and passengers between ports on western Lake Superior. During an autumn storm, it disappeared north of the islands. Wreckage washed ashore for weeks. The hull was located decades later near Outer Island, upright on the lakebed. The wreck site had been surveyed more than once. It had not moved. The new AI's track passed directly over the known wreck coordinates without stopping. At 1:17, Leah's emergency locator activated. She carried a satellite messenger registered to her family. The device transmitted a position nearly 2 miles offshore from Myers Beach, beyond her last tracks and close to the approaching Maribel signal. The message contained no text. A second transmission placed it 300 yards closer to shore. The beacon was moving at the same speed and heading as the vessel. That gave us a living person rescue inside an impossible marine track. Marcus and I prepared to return to the ice with 2 county rescuers, but deteriorating visibility reduced the team. Sending more people onto uncertain ice does not automatically make an operation safer. We selected the lightest equipment that allowed a tethered approach. Cold water suits, inflatable rescue sled, throw bags, ice screws, sounding poles, portable sonar, and a ground-penetrating ice radar used for thickness checks. A shore team anchored our main line to a vehicle and managed communications. We traveled by foot. Snowmobiles would have added weight and noise, and the route near the caves included irregular ice. Each of us wore traction, carried ice picks, and maintained wide spacing. The wind had dropped. Clouds moved apart enough for moonlight to reflect across the lake. Leah's footprints were still visible near shore. We followed them until blowing snow erased the trail. Her beacon continued moving toward us beneath the ice. At 1:23, our ice radar detected a void. The instrument normally showed the layered boundary between snow, ice, and water. The return ahead suggested an airspace directly beneath the ice, perhaps 6 feet high and more than 50 feet long. No natural cavity of that shape should have existed offshore. We drilled a small test hole well outside the anomaly. 14 inches of solid ice came up in clean cores. Water rose normally in the hole. Marcus lowered a hydrophone. At first, we heard ordinary under-ice noise, distant cracks, low movement, and the soft friction of water. Then a mechanical rhythm entered the recording. 3 beats, pause, 3 beats. An engine turning slowly. A ship's bell rang once. The sound came through the ice before it reached the hydrophone. I felt it in my knees. Both compasses rotated. Mine swung north, hesitated, and pointed at the ground. Marcus's did the same. The digital compass in our GPS unit reported an inclination of nearly 90 degrees, as if the magnetic field came from directly beneath us. The Coast Guard watchstander radioed that the Maribel was within half a mile. Nothing moved on the surface. Our headlamps illuminated flat snow and a low-pressure ridge toward the north. The ice beneath our boots remained solid. Yet the radar return grew larger, resolving into multiple airspaces divided by thin vertical structures. It resembled rooms moving beneath us. Leah's beacon stopped 40 yards away. We advanced on tether, probing every step. A dark line traveled toward us under the ice. It moved too smoothly to be a crack. Snow above it settled by less than an inch, then rose again after it passed. The ship's horn sounded. The noise began north of us and crossed beneath our position. Air vibrated inside my lungs. Frost jumped from the ice surface in a straight line. Marcus dropped to one knee but remained secured. Around my boots, the white surface cleared. Ice became transparent in a circle roughly 6 feet across. Beneath it, separated from my soles by 14 inches of clear frozen water, was a row of ship windows. Warm yellow light filled the cabins. Curtains hung upward. Furniture remained fixed to the ceilings. People stood behind the glass with their feet above their heads, upside down relative to me. Their clothing came from different periods: heavy wool coats, work shirts, modern winter jackets, a child's bright nylon parka. Every face tilted up. They watched me pass over them. I saw Leah in the fourth window. She wore the red shell shown in her family photograph. Blood marked one side of her forehead. Both palms pressed against the glass. Her mouth moved, but the horn and ice swallowed the sound. Marcus crawled beside me and saw her. He struck the ice with a gloved fist. Leah reacted immediately. She pointed toward the rear of the moving ship, then drew a line across her throat and shook her head. Behind her, a man in a dark coat stepped into view. Water streamed from his hair toward the cabin ceiling. His skin had the gray softness of long immersion. He placed one hand over Leah's shoulder. Her body went rigid. The transparent window moved past us. Frost closed over the ice. The cabins disappeared. Leah's beacon began traveling southeast again. The Maribel was heading directly toward the mainland sea caves. I told dispatch to clear the cave corridor and pull every civilian back beyond the bluff. Then I asked how many holes the morning ice crew had drilled between our position and shore. There was a pause while someone checked the survey map. 31. They formed a nearly straight chain from the open lake to the western cave entrance, each one 6 inches wide and spaced at regular intervals. That was how we measured thickness before allowing winter access. We drilled, read the layers, marked the site, then moved closer to land. On the map, the line looked like a dotted route. The Maribel was following it. Marcus saw the same thing on his tablet. He enlarged the survey overlay until the blue drill markers sat over the red track from the ship. The match was exact. At each old hole, the signal slowed for several seconds, then accelerated toward the next. "We gave it bearings," he said. I wanted to reject that conclusion. Drill holes froze over quickly in those temperatures. They were not passages. They were small disturbances in a surface that already contained miles of cracks and seams. Then the nearest survey marker made a sound like someone breathing through clenched teeth. It was 10 yards to our left. Snow had concealed the hole, but the orange flag remained visible. Marcus probed around it and cleared the surface with his mitten. The plug was new, clear ice, at least 4 inches thick. Water struck the underside. Once. Twice. 5 fingertips appeared beneath the frozen plug. They were pale and swollen, with torn nails. The hand pressed upward hard enough to bow the ice. The fingers withdrew. A second hand replaced them, smaller and darker. Then another, wearing the shredded cuff of a modern ski glove. Marcus backed away so fast his tether pulled tight. The hands did not break through. They felt around the circular edge as if searching for a latch. When the ship moved on, they vanished. Black water returned beneath the plug. I ordered dispatch to send the drill map to every member of the response. Nobody was to open, widen, or clear any existing hole. Nobody was to drill another one unless Marcus or I authorized it. The instruction contradicted almost every method we used to verify a route. If the ice changed, we drilled. If radar showed an anomaly, we drilled. A clean core told us more than a dozen assumptions. That night, the safest professional action had become the one action I was afraid to take. We continued toward shore, staying offset from the survey line. The Maribel moved beneath the holes while we moved beside them. Sometimes we heard its engine. Sometimes the snow ahead glowed weakly yellow, and shadows passed under it in rows. Leah's beacon remained in the center of the track. The air temperature was below 0, but water began seeping out around the flagged plugs. It spread on top of the ice in thin black circles that steamed in our headlamps. The water smelled of coal smoke, old grease, and something sweetly rotten. Where it touched the snow, it left brown fibers like threads from decayed carpet. We were less than a mile from the mainland when the shore team reported movement at 3 holes behind us. Hands had come through. Not bodies. Only hands. The first emerged from a hole near the operations boundary and gripped its orange survey flag. The second pulled itself to the wrist, then went still. The third wore a gold ring and kept opening and closing as though signaling for help. The responders withdrew without touching them. When the Maribel passed farther east, all 3 slid back below the surface. The holes froze shut within a minute. I asked if anyone had recorded it. Body camera and thermal, dispatch said. No heat signature. That evidence should have made me feel less alone. Instead, it meant the problem was real enough to require a decision. The ship was gaining on the final survey holes near the cliffs. If it could reach through a 6-inch opening, I did not know what it could do with a sea cave mouth 50 feet wide. The mainland caves are not simple tunnels. Waves have carved chambers, arches, narrow passages, and blind pockets into the sandstone. In winter, spray freezes into curtains and pillars. A person entering one chamber may be separated from the lake by walls of blue ice, while hearing water move somewhere behind the rock. Conditions can change in hours. An entrance that appears stable at dawn can become a trap by afternoon. That night, the entrances had been sealed by shore ice for days. Dispatch sent us live video from a camera on the bluff. The feed showed the western cave opening as a black arch crowded with icicles. Snow covered the approach. No open water was visible. Then yellow light appeared deep inside the cave. It came from behind the ice wall, not from the entrance. Long rectangular patches moved across the sandstone like train windows passing behind a station. The camera microphone picked up a bell. Marcus and I stopped about 200 yards offshore. The ice radar showed the airspaces spreading apart. One, the clean cabin geometry blurred into the irregular shape of the cave system. It looked as though the ship were pushing itself into the rock without slowing. Leah's beacon entered the bluff. According to the coordinates, she was now 70 feet inland and 20 feet below the frozen beach. The Maribel's identification signal disappeared from Coast Guard tracking. For almost a minute, there was only wind. Then, my radio spoke in Leah's voice. Don't open the door. The transmission was weak, but clear. She sounded exhausted. Before I could answer, the same sentence repeated from Marcus's radio, then from the spare unit inside our rescue sled. The timing was slightly wrong on each device, creating a soft overlap. Leah, this is Ranger Hale, I said. Can you describe your location? Static hissed. Cabin, she answered. Window side. They can't open it from here. Are you injured? My ankle. My head. I'm cold, but not cold enough. That last part chilled me more than if she had screamed. How did you get inside? Her reply came in pieces. She had been photographing ice formations near the boundary when she heard a horn under the surface. She followed lights toward a pressure seam, believing another visitor might have fallen through. At the seam, she saw a ship moving beneath clear ice. Someone knocked from inside a window. When she knelt, the seam widened without breaking. A door rose through it. She remembered falling into warm darkness. She woke on carpet. Her clothes were wet, but the cabin contained air. The windows looked out into water in every direction. People walked the corridor without speaking. Some dripped constantly. Others looked dry until they turned their faces toward her. They keep bringing me to the window, Leah said. They need someone above to see. Marcus looked toward the cave. Yellow light pulsed behind the ice. Why? I asked. Seeing makes a place for the door. A heavy blow landed against something near her radio. She gasped. Do not cut toward me, she said. That's what they're waiting for. The transmission ended. We could not abandon her. We also could not treat the cave wall like ordinary ice. A saw cut or drilled relief hole might give the ship exactly what it needed. I asked dispatch for every photograph from the afternoon cave assessment. Marcus pulled the images onto his tablet. The western chamber had been checked before sunset. A continuous ice curtain covered its rear wall. The ice was thick, opaque, and attached firmly to the sandstone. No doors, voids, or fresh fractures appeared in the survey. We compared those images to the bluff camera. A vertical dark line now divided the curtain. It had the proportions of a cabin door. We moved to shore using the route already tested earlier that day. 2 responders met us behind the bluff with additional rope, an inflatable rescue platform, and a portable thermal camera. I kept them outside the cave corridor. If the ship reached through our drill holes, crowding more people near a larger opening would only offer it more choices. Marcus and I transferred our tethers from the offshore line to rock anchors above the cave. We carried no ice auger. I took a short-handled maul, 2 ice screws, a pry bar, a rescue sling, and an inflatable lift bag normally used to support a victim at an unstable edge. Marcus brought the sonar head and a battery lamp. Before entering, I marked the time on my recorder and stated our plan. We would approach the door without cutting. We would communicate with Leah. We would attempt extraction only if an existing opening could be controlled with the lift bag. If the structure shifted, if water rose, or if either tether loaded unexpectedly, we would retreat. The rules sounded calm when spoken aloud. Inside, the wind stopped. Our boots scraped over frozen sand and rounded ice. Headlamp beams caught blue columns reaching from floor to ceiling. The cave narrowed, then opened into the western chamber. The yellow light had disappeared. The rear curtain looked solid. Marcus aimed the thermal camera. Most of the wall registered at the ambient temperature. A rectangle 6 feet high and less than 3 feet wide was warmer by nearly 20 degrees. I pressed one glove against it. An engine turned over beneath my palm. The vibration traveled through my arm into my jaw. Paint appeared under the frost, dark green, blistered with age. A brass plate emerged at eye level. Its letters were reversed as if we were looking at the back of a door from inside the wall. The plate read Cabin 1230. 3 knocks came from the other side. "Leah," I called. 3 more knocks answered. Marcus inspected the perimeter. The rectangular seam did not continue through the sandstone floor. It ended an inch above it. There were no hinges on our side, no handle, and no gap wide enough for a tool. The sonar produced a return that should not have been possible. Behind the ice curtain was a hollow room about 9 feet deep. Beyond that lay another wall, a corridor, and several moving shapes. Past them was open water. Yet the cave extended 70 feet into solid mainland rock. One moving shape approached the door. The brass plate became warm. "Back," Marcus said. We moved away as a handprint formed in the frost at shoulder height. Beep. Unlike the swollen hands at the drill holes, this one belonged to a living person. It was small. The fingers trembled. Leah's voice came through the ice. "They're at the other end of the hall. Can you open it?" I asked. "No handle. Any latch? Any removable panel?" "There's a keyhole." I saw none on our side. Marcus scraped frost from the plate and found a small brass circle beneath it. The opening was packed with clear ice. I did not drill it. I heated the pry bar under my coat, then held its tip against the plug. The method was slow, but it removed the ice without creating a new path through the wall. Meltwater ran down the metal and froze on my glove. The keyhole opened. Air rushed out. It smelled like wet wool, tobacco, fuel oil, and lake mud. From inside came the murmur of many people trying not to be heard. I looked through. Leah's eye filled the opening. Her pupil contracted in my headlamp beam. She was alive. Behind her, the cabin was tilted sharply. Carpet covered what should have been the ceiling. A round window showed black water full of drifting ice crystals. A wooden chair remained bolted upside down above her. "Listen to me," I said. "We are not cutting the wall. We need to use the door that already exists. Can you find hinges?" She moved away. Through the tiny opening, I heard her feel along the frame. There were hinges on her right side and a recessed wheel where a handle should have been. The wheel turned, but the door did not release. Marcus put his ear to the ice. "Pressure," he said. "Or something holding it." Leah returned to the keyhole. "There's water in the corridor now," she whispered. I asked how high. "Ankles." The moving shapes on Marcus's sonar multiplied. They crowded the passage outside her cabin. Water climbed around them, but their heads remained at different heights, as if some stood on the floor and others on the walls. We needed leverage from both sides. I threaded a length of thin accessory cord through the keyhole. Leah caught it. I tied our end to the eye of the pry bar and instructed her to attach hers to the wheel, then stand clear. The cord was not strong enough to open a pressure door. It was only meant to tell us when the wheel had completed its turn. She pulled twice when ready. Marcus set 2 ice screws into solid natural ice on either side of the rectangle. He clipped the folded lift bag between them and the curtain. If the door opened toward us, we could inflate the bag to control the gap and close it quickly. If the wall failed, the bag might slow the flow long enough for the tethers to pull us clear. I placed the pry bar against the existing seam. "Turn," I said. The cord moved. I pushed. Nothing happened. From inside came a metallic groan, followed by a bell somewhere deeper in the ship. Water seeped through the keyhole. It was warmer than freezing and black with soot. "Again," I said. Leah turned the wheel. Marcus and I leaned against the bar together. The door shifted less than the width of a fingernail. Every light in the cave went out. Our headlamps, the battery lamp, the tablet, and both radios died at once. In the darkness, people began knocking from inside the ice curtain. Not only at the door, the entire rear wall filled with impacts. Knuckles struck from behind 6 feet of frozen waterfall and solid sandstone. Some knocked in measured groups. Others scratched. One fist hit directly opposite my face and left a wet oval visible in the faint yellow light leaking through the seam. The Mirabelle's horn sounded inside the rock. The door opened 2 inches. Warm air burst through, carrying spray and voices. Marcus triggered the lift bag. It inflated against the door, preventing it from swinging wider. Our headlamps flickered back to life. Through the narrow gap, I saw Leah on the floor, pulling herself forward with both arms. Her left ankle bent badly inside her boot. Water covered the carpet behind her. At the far end of the cabin, a second door stood open to the corridor. Passengers filled it. "Mayaske, hi." The gray man in the dark coat stood first. One side of his face had collapsed inward. A brass key hung from his neck. Behind him were men, women, and children in clothing spanning nearly a century. Some were bloated. Some were burned. Some looked recently lost. All stared at the narrow opening we had made. None looked at Leah. They looked at us. The gray man raised one hand. Every passenger rushed forward. Marcus dropped beside the gap and caught Leah under the arms. I grabbed the rescue sling, pushed it through, and told her to pull the loop over her shoulders. She understood before I finished. Her hands moved with the quick precision of someone who had spent hours imagining exactly how she might be pulled out. The first passenger reached her as the sling tightened. It was not the gray man. A boy in an old wool sweater slid through the water and caught Leah's injured boot. His mouth opened. Lake water poured out, but the voice came from every radio in the cave. "Keep the door." Marcus hauled. Leah screamed as her ankle struck the frame. I reached through the gap, found the top of her boot, and released its laces. The boy held the boot while her foot slipped free. We pulled her head and shoulders into the cave. The passengers hit the door from inside. The lift bag compressed. Ice screws creaked in their placements. The opening widened another inch. Several hands reached through around Leah, gripping her coat, the sling, and the edge of Marcus's sleeve. They were soft with decay, but impossibly strong. I struck one wrist with the pry bar. It folded against the metal without breaking its grip. Marcus twisted his arm free, leaving part of his outer glove in a passenger's hand. The gray man remained in the cabin doorway. He did not join the others. He watched the opening and held the brass key against his chest as if waiting for enough space. Our tethers snapped tight. The load came from behind us. I looked back. Hands had emerged from cracks in the cave floor. Not drilled holes this time. Natural seams no wider than a coin had opened under the rope. Fingers pinched the lines and pulled them downward. The ropes cut into the ice and vibrated like wires. Dispatch called my name. Their voices returned through bursts of static. Load cell at the bluff anchor had risen past the combined weight of Marcus, Leah, and me. Something was trying to drag the entire system into the floor. I ordered the shore team not to haul. If they pulled against the force, they might widen the seams or tear out the rock anchors. Instead, I told them to prepare the secondary line and give us controlled slack. It sounded wrong. A rescue line is security. Slack feels like surrender. But I needed the moving ship to stop treating us as a fixed object. The shore team fed several feet. The hands dropped with the rope. The load decreased. That gave Marcus room to roll backward. Leah slid farther through the door until only her injured leg remained inside. A passenger gripped her bare ankle. Another caught the hem of her pants. I clipped my short tether to Marcus, crawled to the opening, and drove both boots against the ice wall. Then, I reached in. The cabin water was warm enough to hurt. Hands touched my arm immediately. They explored the cuff of my dry suit, searching for an opening. I found Leah's knee, then the wrist around her ankle. The skin felt loose over hard bones. I could not pry it free. The gray man stepped closer. His brass key swung forward. It was large, square-toothed, and green with corrosion. He lifted it toward the door. Leah saw him and began kicking with her free leg. "That locks it open," she gasped. The passengers had shown her what happened at every stop. A person above saw the ship. An opening formed. Someone inside used the key. Once the key crossed the threshold, the opening remained after the vessel moved on. That was why the hands at our frozen drill holes had searched the edges. They had not been trying to climb through 6 inches of ice. They had been trying to pass the key. I let go of the wrist and seized Leah's pants with both hands. Marcus pulled the sling. Fabric tore. Her leg came through, leaving skin from her ankle in the passenger's fingers. "Close it!" I shouted. Marcus reversed the lift bag valve. The pressure dropped, but the door did not move. Too many arms filled the gap. I swung them all sideways, not at the ice, but at the reaching hands. One withdrew. Then another. A woman in a blue coat forced her face into the opening. Her eyes were clear and terrified. For 1 second, she looked less like a threat than a drowning victim. "Please," she whispered. Behind her, the gray man pushed the key between her ribs. I drove the pry bar into the gap and turned it broadside. The key struck the steel and fell inside the cabin. The woman's expression changed. Her jaw opened too far. Black water spilled over the threshold. The door slammed against the pry bar. The force bent it nearly in half. I pulled it free, and the door closed on the remaining fingers. They disappeared without blood. The seam sealed from top to bottom. Yellow light narrowed to a line, then went dark. The cave became silent. For 3 seconds, nothing moved. Then the ship accelerated beneath us. The sandstone floor rolled like the deck of a vessel. Ice pillars cracked. One dropped from the ceiling and shattered where Marcus had been kneeling. Water surged through the keyhole in a thin jet. The brass plate grew hot enough to steam. We secured Leah to the inflatable platform and began retreating. Her left foot was bare and bleeding, but circulation remained. Marcus dragged from the front. I stayed behind, managing the tethers and watching the rear curtain. The door moved beside us. It did not remain in the wall. Its outline traveled through the cave, sliding across solid sandstone at walking speed. Cabin windows appeared one after another in the rock. Passengers followed behind their glass. Some struck it. Others simply watched us leave. At the final window, the gray man stood alone. The brass key was back around his neck. He lifted one finger and pointed toward me. My chest harness jerked. The sacrificial line attached to our offshore sled had somehow threaded through the sealed keyhole behind us. It tightened, pulling me backward. The Maribel had caught the equipment line while passing beneath the cave. I could have tried to save it. The sled carried expensive sonar, radar, medical supplies, and the only complete recording of the ship beneath the ice. More important, the line offered a physical connection to whatever was happening. It also ran across Leah's platform and around Marcus's boot. I cut it. The loose end whipped into the moving wall. It passed through sandstone without leaving a mark. The window containing the gray man followed it, then vanished near the cave mouth. The horn blew once from beneath the frozen beach. Outside, a dark ridge traveled under the snow toward open lake. The final 4 survey plugs burst upward in sequence. From each hole, a hand rose holding a piece of our cut rope. The hands remained for a moment arranged in a line pointing offshore. See, then they released it and sank. The ice closed over them. The Maribel's identification signal reappeared 2 miles from shore. It moved northwest at 12 knots, following the drill route backward. At each survey hole, the track paused. Responders watched the plugs darken and heard knocking below them. Nobody opened one. When the signal reached the end of the tested corridor, it continued across unmeasured ice. Coast Guard radar held the target for another 9 minutes. Then it stopped directly above the known wreck near Outer Island. The horn sounded on hydrophones along the shore. After that, the lake was quiet. Leah spent 4 days in a hospital. She had a fractured ankle, a concussion, cuts on her hands, and a narrow ring of damaged skin around her lower leg. Doctors expected severe hypothermia after her hours inside the ship. Her core temperature on arrival was normal. Water squeezed from her clothes measured warmer than the air, but contained tiny freshwater organisms usually found far below the winter surface. There were traces of coal dust and fuel oil in her hair. She remembered more after sleeping. The passengers called the gray man the purser, though she never heard his name. He carried the key and chose where the ship stopped. The others did not all belong to the Maribel. They came from fishing boats, ferries, kayaks, snowmobiles, and vehicles lost through the ice. Some had been aboard for decades. A few believed only hours had passed. At every opening, the purser moved someone to a window. He needed a living person above to recognize a living person below. Recognition created the door. A cut, a crack, or a drilled hole gave him a place to fit the key. Leah asked why he had not used the pressure seam that took her. One passenger told her that a door opened from the lake could take one person. A door opened from land could empty the ship. That was the open door they wanted us to make in the cave. Her camera was recovered inside the rescue sling. The body was cracked, and the battery had swollen. The technicians extracted most of the memory card. The first images were ordinary photographs of ice formations. Then came a sequence she did not remember taking. The images showed the Maribel beneath the ice. In one, the ship lay upside down under her feet, its lights extending into darkness. In the next, a cabin door stood upright in a pressure seam. Later, photographs were taken from inside cabin 12. Some showed passengers crowded in the corridor. Others showed black water outside the round window. The strangest frames pointed upward through the ship's ceiling. Above it was clear lake ice, and beyond that, Marcus and I crossed the surface on our outward route. Those photographs had been created almost an hour before we reached Leah's first beacon location. The final image showed the cave door after it closed. Frost covered the inside. Someone had traced 2 words in it with a finger. Next winter. The official investigation separated every piece of evidence into a different explanation. The identification signal was classified as deliberate interference or Equipment failure. The radar return became an unusual moving pressure feature. The lights were attributed to refraction. The voices were radio contamination. Stress and cold accounted for what we believed we saw. No single explanation addressed all of it. The load cell at the bluff anchor had recorded a pull of several thousand pounds moving steadily toward the lake. Body cameras showed hands emerging from survey holes. Thermal video showed no body heat. The cave sonar recorded rectilinear rooms inside solid rock. Leah's clothing contained deep-water organisms during a season when the lake surface was sealed. Most damaging of all, a summer survey confirmed the wreck of the Maribel still rested near Outer Island. Its hull had not shifted. Before the dive, investigators also removed 3 cores from the route the signal had followed. Each core showed ordinary seasonal layers until the drill reached the bottom inch. There, embedded against the underside of the ice, were green paint flakes, strands of wool carpet, and soot. The paint matched a surviving panel from the Maribel preserved in a local collection. The carpet fibers carried the same faded red and gold pattern visible in an old builder's photograph of the passenger cabins. One core contained half of a brass coat check token. Its stamped number corresponded to cabin 12 on a deck plan recovered from the shipping company's archives. The token was dry when technicians split the core, even though it had been sealed inside lake ice. The laboratory sealed every sample in separate evidence bags. By the following morning, the paint, soot, and carpet had vanished. The bags were still locked and showed no tears. Only the brass token remained. It had developed a fresh black stain in the shape of a fingerprint. Leah identified the print's position before anyone showed her a photograph. She said the purser had held the token between the same 2 fingers while telling the passengers which window to stand behind. No version of the final report mentioned the cores, the missing material, or her identification. The token went into a secure evidence cabinet. Twice that winter, its cabinet alarm activated at 1:26 in the morning. Both times, the shelves inside were wet. Divers descended when visibility improved. They found the name on the stern, the collapsed upper deck, and the damage documented in earlier surveys. Cabin 12 remained inside the wreck. Its door was closed. Our cut rescue line was tied around its handle. I watched the dive footage in a secure room with Marcus and 2 investigators. The rope was modern, with the same color pattern and manufacturer marks as our issued line. The cut end matched my rescue knife. It descended from the cabin handle, crossed the deck, and disappeared into a layer of silt. The diver tried to remove it. The knot tightened. When he touched the cabin door, his compass rotated downward. He withdrew immediately. Nobody opened it. The park kept the cave corridor closed for the rest of that winter. Publicly, the reason was unstable ice, which was true. Privately, we filled every survey hole from shore outward using slush and snow, never standing directly above one. We stopped drilling in straight lines near the caves. We began logging unexplained radio signals and identification tracks that appeared under frozen water. Leah recovered. She did not return to photograph the caves. Once each year, usually during the coldest part of winter, she sends me a message asking whether the lake has made any doors. I answer honestly. For 2 seasons, it did not. Then, during an overnight ice assessment, Marcus and I found a circular patch of clear ice at a site nobody had drilled. It was 6 inches across, perfectly smooth, and warm enough to melt falling snow. Radar showed 14 inches of solid ice beneath it. There was no void and no crack. We marked the location and withdrew. By morning, 30 more circles had appeared between that spot and the western cave. They were spaced exactly like our old survey holes. None had been cut from above. Hydrophones detected a slow engine moving beneath them. Coast Guard tracking showed no vessel. The known wreck remained motionless near Outer Island. At 1:26, a hand pressed up under the first circle. It was not swollen or gray. It wore the outer glove Marcus had lost inside cabin 12. One finger tapped the ice. The hand moved to the second circle without crossing the space between them. Then the third. Then the fourth. It was coming toward land, one unopened door at a time. We closed the caves before sunrise. The report says we did it because the ice was unsafe. That is still the only part of the report I know is true. At 3:14 in the morning, an avalanche receiver detected 6 beacons moving uphill inside Emmons Glacier, more than 80 feet below solid ice. Every beacon belonged to a climber alive beside me at Camp Sherman. Mine was strapped to my chest when a 7th signal appeared under my boots, broadcasting the same code. Then my rope went taut and slid into a pencil-thin seam, pulling with 900 pounds of force toward a crevasse we had sounded as empty. We cut it. 12 minutes later, my voice called from beneath the glacier and said, "Stop building the hull system. It learns through tension." We had already weighted all 3 anchors. My name is Eli Mercer. I spent 11 climbing seasons at Mount Rainier, most of them moving between high camps, checking permits, assessing routes, and responding when a normal climb stopped being normal. Rainier is not a mountain that allows casual mistakes. It rises more than 14,000 feet above sea level and carries more glacier ice than any other peak in the contiguous United States. Climbers can see Seattle from the upper slopes on a clear morning. In bad weather, they can lose sight of their own boots. The Emmons route approaches from the northeast. Teams pass through White River, climb toward Glacier Basin, cross onto the Interglacier, and eventually reach Camp Sherman at roughly 9,500 feet. Above camp, the route travels across the Emmons Glacier through changing crevices, snow bridges, ice falls, and long slopes exposed to wind. Most summit teams leave around midnight. They move while the snow is firm, tied into ropes, wearing crampons, carrying axes, harnesses, pickets, screws, pulleys, and enough equipment to pull a partner from a crevasse. The route is never truly fixed. Wands mark one version of it, but glaciers move. A safe bridge can sag. A closed crack can open. A familiar line can become wrong in a single warm afternoon. That is why we teach systems instead of confidence. Stay roped. Protect the team. Test bridges. Build redundant anchors. Never trust one point when a life hangs below you. On the night this happened, every one of those rules worked against us. It was late June. A storm had moved across the mountain during the afternoon and left almost a foot of new snow above Camp Sherman. By evening, the wind had dropped, but clouds remained wrapped around the upper mountain. Visibility above camp changed from 100 yards to less than 10 with no warning. The temperature fell quickly. The fresh snow began to stiffen over older, harder layers. Most climbers abandoned their summit plans. We still had 9 registered parties in camp, including 2 guided teams. One independent pair had not returned. Their names were Beth Vale and Callum Reyes. Beth was 31 and worked as an emergency nurse in Tacoma. Callum was 34, a mechanical engineer from Oregon. Both had glacier experience. Their permit, equipment inspection, and route plan raised no concerns. They left Camp Sherman shortly after midnight, reached the upper corridor before dawn, then turned around when the weather deteriorated. Their final satellite message arrived just before noon. It said they were descending below 11,000 feet and moving slowly because Callum had injured his knee. The coordinates placed them on the standard route. Another team passed the same location 40 minutes later and saw nobody. By sunset, Beth and Callum were overdue. We attempted radio and satellite contact. Nothing returned. The Park helicopter made one reconnaissance pass below the cloud deck, but could not enter the upper glacier. Wind near the ridgeline was erratic, and the ceiling continued to lower. Air operations shut down for the night. That left a ground search. I led it with climbing ranger Lena Ortiz and volunteer rescuer Noah Price. Lena had worked 6 seasons on Rainier and could read glacier terrain better than anyone I knew. Noah was a mountain rescue instructor who had come to camp with a training group. He had the calm habit of checking every carabiner twice, without ever appearing slow. We carried 2 ropes, a litter, insulation, oxygen, medical gear, a compact radar unit used to assess snow bridges, avalanche receivers, ice screws, snow pickets, pulleys, and radios. 2 guided teams agreed to remain at camp and support communications. Every climber switched their avalanche beacon to transmit so we could account for them if the fresh snow released. At 11:40, we left camp. The first section was easy to follow. Wands leaned downwind through the snow. Our headlamps created white tunnels in the fog. Crampon points broke the crust with small, regular sounds. We moved as a 3-person rope team, spaced far enough apart that one fall would not pull all of us into the same opening. Near 10,400 feet, we found Beth and Callum's descent track. 2 parallel lines of crampon prints crossed the route, then disappeared beneath wind-blown snow. A broken trekking pole lay nearby. The lower section was bent, but there was no blood and no sign of a fall. Lena checked the pole against the equipment description. It belonged to Beth. We widened our search and called their names. The fog swallowed every response. At 12:38, Noah's avalanche receiver picked up a signal. It was faint and intermittent. The display indicated a transmitter more than 40 meters away. We shifted direction, moving west across the route. The indicated distance dropped, then rose, even though we continued in a straight line. That can happen around steep ice or multiple buried transmitters. Signals bend. Antennas overlap. A number on a receiver is not a depth reading, and anyone who treats it like one can dig in the wrong place. We switched to a careful grid search. The lowest reading appeared over a flat patch of snow between 2 visible crevices. Radar showed more than 20 feet of dense glacier ice beneath us. There was no shallow burial pocket. No void. No body. The identification code matched Callum's beacon. I called Camp Sherman and asked whether anyone else carried the same model. A guide checked the registration list. Several did, but the full code was unique. Then Lena found a second signal. This one matched Beth's beacon. It moved while we watched. The receiver pointed uphill. The distance dropped steadily for several seconds, then increased. Something transmitting Beth's code had passed beneath us from south to north. We probed the snow. The poles struck hard ice at the expected depth. There was no bridge, no soft layer, and no crack large enough to admit a glove. Noah knelt and placed one ear near the surface. "Rope," he said. I heard it after removing my hood. Somewhere below the ice, a loaded rope creaked through a carabiner. The pitch rose and fell in short cycles, exactly like a haul line being pulled and reset. We called Beth and Callum again. 3 tugs traveled through the rope connecting our team. None of us had moved. The pull came from the glacier under Lena's boots. Our rope sank into the snow between her and me, entering a hairline seam that had not been visible a moment earlier. Lena stepped back. The rope lifted free, and the seam closed. We marked the location and continued uphill. At 1:15, we found Callum's pack resting upright beside a route wand. Its hip belt was fastened. Snow covered the top flap, but none had entered the main compartment. The pack looked as if someone wearing it had simply ceased to exist while the buckles remained closed. Inside were his food, spare gloves, goggles, and satellite messenger. The device had sent the noon position report. Why? Its battery still held a charge. Callum's beacon was not inside. Behind the pack, Beth's rope ran into the snow. It was a blue dry-treated climbing rope, the correct diameter and brand listed on their permit inspection. One end had been tied to the pack's haul loop with a figure 8. The other extended uphill beneath the surface. We cleared snow by hand. The rope did not enter a crevasse. It passed directly into clear glacier ice. 6 inches of it remained visible below the surface, frozen at an angle. Beyond that, it descended into blue darkness. Noah tested it with a spring scale. The line held a steady load of roughly 100 pounds. When he pulled, something below pulled back. We built a temporary anchor using 2 snow pickets placed in a wide V. A backup ice screw went into expose hard ice beside the wand. I clipped the rope through a progress capture pulley and took in a few inches. The load increased. For a moment, we thought we had found one of the climbers suspended in a hidden fracture. Then the rope moved sideways inside the ice. It cut a dark path uphill without breaking the surface. The frozen sections slid through solid ice as if the glacier were water. Our anchor groaned. The pickets tilted toward the pole. I released the system. The blue rope stopped. From below came 3 deliberate knocks. Lena keyed her radio. Callum, if you can hear us, knock 3 times. 3 knocks answered. Beth, if that is you, knock twice. Nothing. Callum, are you attached to the rope? 1 knock. We established a code. 1 meant yes. 2 meant no. 3 meant uncertain or unable to answer. The responses remained consistent. Callum was alive. He was injured. Beth was not with him. He believed he was more than 1 rope length below us. When I asked whether there was an open crevasse nearby, he knocked twice. That should have ended the exchange. If there was no space around him, he could not breathe, move, or strike the ice. Yet the signal continued. I radioed camp and requested every available detail from the last team that had seen Beth and Callum. While dispatch located the climbers, Noah scanned the area with radar. The first pass showed solid ice. The second showed a narrow void 30 feet down. On the third pass, the void was 40 feet uphill. It was moving between scans. The shape resembled a crevasse viewed from above, long, thin, and deep. But real crevasses move with glacier flow over days and seasons, not 40 feet in a minute. This one traveled against the direction of the ice. Callum's beacon moved with it. We had to choose between following an impossible signal and abandoning a confirmed living person. Search and rescue decisions are often described as a balance between urgency and safety. That description sounds cleaner than the reality. The reality is that evidence can be wrong, conditions can lie, and a voice in the dark can make a trained person accept risks they would reject in daylight. We followed. The blue rope led uphill under the ice. We stayed on the surface, placing protection where the slope steepened. Each time we weighted an anchor, the hidden crevasse paused below it. When we removed the load, the void resumed moving. Lena noticed the pattern first. "It's waiting for tension," she said. We tested the idea at a safe position. Noah placed a single screw and clipped a short sling to it. He leaned back with only body weight. Radar showed the void turning beneath him. It approached the screw. He stood, removing the load. The shape stopped 10 feet below. We backed away without retrieving the screw. A thin line rose through the ice directly beneath it. The line resembled a crack but moved with purpose. When it touched the screw tip, the metal vibrated. Then another ice screw appeared inside the glacier. It formed beside the first one, upside down and 3 feet below the surface. Same silver hanger. Same red paint on the shaft. Same manufacturer mark. Noah removed our screw and compared it with the object below. The original remained in his hand. The copy descended through the ice until our headlamps could no longer reach it. We should have retreated then. There was no protocol for a glacier copying rescue hardware. There was no defensible risk assessment that ended with us going higher. Then Callum's voice came through my radio. "Please don't leave me with them." His transmission lasted less than 2 seconds. It was enough. I asked who was with him. Only static answered. The weather worsened. Wind drove loose snow across the slope in sheets. Camp disappeared behind cloud even though it was less than a mile away. Our radio link remained strong, but the mountain above us produced low sounds that could have been icefall, thunder, or movement within the glacier. Dispatch located the team that had crossed Callum and Beth's last position. The climbers remembered seeing a rope stretched across the route with no people attached to it. They assumed it was old equipment being used as a marker. One climber stepped over it. Another clipped it briefly while adjusting his crampon. That climber's avalanche beacon was now transmitting beneath us. The guide at camp confirmed the climber stood beside him, uninjured, with his original beacon still operating on his chest. We checked all registered codes. 6 signals were moving inside the glacier. Callum's, Beth's, the climber who had clipped the rope, 2 guides who had handled Callum's pack earlier in the week, and mine. Mine was still strapped beneath my jacket. The duplicate signal appeared directly below my boots, then traveled uphill toward the hidden void. All 6 converged there, circling one another on our receivers as if several buried people were walking around a room. Noah turned his beacon off. Its duplicate continued transmitting. That ruled out reflection or receiver interference. The glacier was not repeating signals. It was producing new ones with copied codes. At 2:10, Callum began moving faster. The blue rope slid beneath the ice with enough speed to hiss. The hidden void advanced uphill toward a zone of heavily broken glacier. Beyond it, the slope steepened and split around a series of open crevasses. If the signal entered that terrain, following on foot would become much more dangerous. We moved parallel to the rope, probing every step. The fresh snow concealed openings that had been visible the previous day. Twice, the first person crossed a bridge one at a time while the others belayed from behind. Twice, radar showed the hidden void stopping beneath our loaded protection. It was not merely attracted to metal. It followed force. An anchor under tension told it where we were. We began traveling without fixed protection whenever the terrain allowed. We kept the team rope loose and moved simultaneously, relying on spacing and self-arrest rather than placing screws or pickets. It reduced the number of signals the glacier could follow, but it also reduced our margin for error. Near 10,900 feet, Beth's rope turned sharply east and vanished beneath a sagging snow bridge. On the far side, a single crampon lay upright, its points buried. The straps were still buckled in the shape of a boot. Lena recognized it as Beth's left crampon. The bridge crossed an open crevasse roughly 12 feet wide. Headlamps could not reach the bottom. Wind had built a cornice over one edge, making the lip unstable. The blue rope entered the north wall 15 feet below. Callum knocked continuously. This was the first real opening we had found. If we were going to reach him, this was our chance. We established a 3-point anchor well back from the lip. 2 pickets buried as dead men, and 1 ice screw in hard glacier ice. Noah equalized them. Lena monitored the radar while I prepared to descend. We added a separate safety line because redundancy is not optional when a rescuer enters a crevasse. The moment I weighted the system, the void below stopped moving. "Holding at 68 feet, Lena said. I descended through the lip. The first 20 feet were ordinary. Wind-carved snow overhung blue ice. Small fragments rattled down the walls. My crampons found firm placements, and the ropes ran cleanly above me. At 30 feet, the crevasse narrowed. At 40, it opened into a vertical chamber broader than the surface gap. Dot. My headlamp illuminated layers of compressed snow and ancient blue ice. Bubbles formed pale bands across the walls. Melt channels curved downward like veins. Then I saw the equipment. Ice screws, pickets, carabiners, pulleys, and sections of rope were embedded in the wall. Some looked new. Others were old enough that their designs had not been used in decades. They did not appear to have fallen. They were arranged in repeated anchor systems, each one a distorted copy of equipment once placed on the glacier above. Every piece was upside down. Ropes extended from them into the ice. Loaded strands vibrated beneath the surface like tendons. When Lena adjusted my belay, dozens of buried lines moved in response. The glacier had copied more than objects. It had copied the relationships between them. I descended to 60 feet. Callum was not there. The receiver showed his beacon less than 5 meters from me, behind the east wall. The wall was clear enough to transmit light. I pressed my helmet against it and saw a moving shadow on the other side. Callum struck the ice with a carabiner. He was trapped inside a second chamber parallel to mine. No opening connected them. Air surrounded him, but the void was sealed within solid glacier ice. I could see only portions of his body as the light refracted. One arm. A shoulder. The side of his helmet. His right leg hung at an unnatural angle. He remained clipped to Beth's blue rope, which passed through the wall between us without making a hole. I had tried the radio. His real voice came faintly through the ice before it reached my receiver. "Don't pull," he said. "We have you," I answered. "Where is Beth?" He pointed downward. I lowered my headlamp. Far beneath him, at the edge of its beam, a second chamber glowed weakly blue. Something moved inside it. "She followed the rescue team," Callum said. "We're the rescue team." He shook his head. After their fall, he and Beth landed on a snow shelf about 40 feet below the route. Callum injured his leg. Beth set an anchor and prepared a haul system. Before she finished, they heard voices deeper in the crevasse. The voices identified themselves as climbing rangers and gave correct instructions for building the system. One voice belonged to me. Beth trusted it because we had inspected their gear at Camp Sherman. The voice repeated something I had told them about equalizing pickets. It directed her to load the anchor. When she did, the shelf moved. The open crevasse closed above them. Ice became transparent around the rope. Equipment began appearing inside the walls. Beth saw headlamps below and believed rescuers had found another entrance. She unclipped from Callum to reach them. The lights moved away. She followed. The chamber carried her downward through the glacier without breaking the surface. Callum remained attached to the rope. Each time someone above loaded an anchor, his chamber rose toward the tension, then changed direction when the load shifted. Our attempts to pull him had not brought him closer to an exit. They had taught the chamber how to follow us. I asked what else was inside with him. He turned toward the rear of the void. Shapes stood beyond my headlamp beam. They wore helmets. Several had park service markings. One held a coil of rope in exactly the way I carried mine over my shoulder. Their faces were hidden behind frost. "They only move when the rope is tight," Callum whispered. Above me, an anchor popped. The sound came through the ropes as a violent metallic shock. My main line dropped several inches. Lena shouted that one buried picket had pulled free. The chamber containing Callum rose. It passed me with impossible speed. His hand struck the clear wall as he moved upward. The shapes behind him moved at the same time, pulled by copied ropes embedded in the ice. My safety line tightened around my harness. Something below had taken it. The load climbed rapidly. I braced both feet against the wall, but the pull came straight down. The rope did not slide across the lip. It passed into a seam beside my hip. The seam was thinner than a pencil mark, yet the full rope disappeared through it. Lena read the force at more than 900 pounds. I tried ascending, but my device locked against the opposing load. The harness compressed my ribs. My feet began to lift from the wall. I ordered Noah to cut the safety line. He hesitated because cutting a rescuer's backup violates every instinct we train. The main line was already compromised. If it failed, I would fall. The seam widened enough for 3 fingers to emerge from the ice. They wore my glove. "Cut it," I said again. Noah cut. The severed line snapped downward and vanished into the seam. The gloved fingers withdrew. My main rope held. The chamber stopped moving. They raised me to the surface. It was 3:14 in the morning. While Lena checked my ribs, Camp Sherman reported that every duplicate beacon had begun moving uphill inside the glacier. The 6 people whose codes had been copied stood together at camp so dispatch could film their original devices transmitting at the same time. The hidden signals passed 80 feet beneath us. Our 3 anchor points loaded without anyone touching the ropes. The snow over each one depressed in a perfect circle. A low groan traveled from the pickets to the ice screw. "Aye." Radar showed 3 narrow columns forming below them, descending toward the moving chamber. The columns looked like bones. I cut the rope connecting the system to the blue line. Noah pulled the pickets. Lena removed the screw. The columns remained. 12 minutes later, my radio transmitted on the rescue channel. The voice was mine. "Stop building the hull system," it said. "It learns through tension." We had already weighted all 3 anchors. The transmission repeated from camp, where every radio received it at once. Then a second voice spoke behind mine. Beth said, "It's almost finished." I keyed the radio. "Beth, what is almost finished?" Her answer came from the glacier under us. "The team." Radar revealed 3 human-sized shapes climbing the columns toward the surface. They moved only when wind loaded the abandoned ropes. We gathered every loose line, unclipped every sling, and removed every anchor we could reach. The shapes stopped about 20 feet below. One held a coil of copied rope. One carried a litter. The third wore a helmet with my identification number printed across the front. Lena wanted to retreat and wait for aviation. Under normal circumstances, she would have been right. We had confirmed an unstable glacier structure, unexplained forces strong enough to overload anchors, and a rescuer nearly dragged into solid ice. The storm made further descent impossible to justify. But retreat carried a different risk. The hidden void was moving toward Camp Sherman. Every tent there was secured with buried pickets and loaded guy lines. Equipment caches were anchored against wind. Guided teams slapped clip to safety lines near the edge of the glacier. The camp contained dozens of tension points. If the glacier followed loaded systems, Camp Sherman was not shelter. It was a map. I ordered camp evacuated onto the rocky ridge. Climbers left tents, stoves, and most personal equipment behind. Guides cut guy lines instead of digging out anchors. Everyone kept their beacons transmitting so dispatch could distinguish the real signals from the copies. Meanwhile, we needed to reach Beth without giving the chamber another fixed point to follow. Noah proposed a snow bollard. Instead of driving metal into the glacier, we would carve a broad horseshoe trench in consolidated snow and wrap a rope around it. The load would spread across several yards of surface. There would be no screw tip, picket, or narrow anchor for the ice to duplicate. We would back it with human weight on an untensioned line, keeping the safety system slack unless the primary failed. It was slower and less precise than our original setup. It was also the only plan that did not require placing more bones into the glacier. We moved 50 yards east to a mound of wind-packed snow. Radar showed no void beneath it. We carved the bollard, rounded every edge, padded the trench with packs, and routed the rope without metal hardware touching the snow. For 10 minutes, nothing beneath us moved. Then Beth knocked from below. 2 knocks. Pause. 2 knocks again. Lena scanned the slope. The sound came from a shallow depression between us and the original crevasse. Radar showed a sealed chamber 25 feet down. Go. It was rising slowly without following any anchor. The blue rope passed through its center. Beth was pulling herself toward us. We clipped her rope to the bollard system, using a pulley suspended above the snow on a padded rescue pack. Noah and I hauled by walking downhill, never allowing the line to become fully static. Lena watched the radar. The chamber rose. At 15 feet, the 3 copied rescuers began moving again. They were not following our bollard. They were climbing Beth's rope from below. I could see their positions on radar. One hand over another, they ascended through solid ice without disturbing it. The copied litter hung between 2 of them. The figure wearing my helmet came first. Beth's chamber reached 10 feet beneath the surface. The snow above her began to sink. A shallow oval formed, then cracked around the edges. Air escaped in short, warm breaths that smelled of wet stone and old canvas. We did not cut. We kept hauling until the chamber created its own opening. The oval dropped inward. Beth's hand broke through the crust. Lena caught her wrist and widened the existing gap with both arms. Beth emerged headfirst, attached to the blue rope and coated in fine ice crystals. Her helmet was gone. Blood had frozen along one side of her face. She was conscious enough to say one word. Cut. I severed the blue rope below her harness. The loose end snapped into the hole. A second hand reached after it. The glove matched mine, including a tear near the thumb that had happened earlier that season. It grabbed the edge and pulled. A helmet rose beneath the opening. My identification number showed through the snow. Noah collapsed the bollard trench with his shovel. Lena and I rolled Beth onto the rescue litter. The hole narrowed around the copied hand. It did not release. Fingers remained above the surface while the wrist froze into new ice. I struck the glove with my axe. The hand shattered like clear glass. Inside it were no bones or blood, only braided fibers of frozen rope. The copied rescuer fell out of radar range. The other 2 descended with it. For the first time that night, the duplicate signal from my beacon went silent. Beth's pulse was rapid but strong. She had a deep cut above her ear, frostbite on several fingertips, and bruising around her waist from the harness. Her core remained warm. Her clothing was dry beneath the outer layer, though she had spent hours in a chamber surrounded by glacier ice. She grabbed my sleeve while Lena treated her. "Callum is moving toward camp," she said. They clipped him into the main line. Our receiver confirmed it. Callum's signal had turned downhill. It moved faster than a person could descend, following the buried tension columns toward Camp Sherman. The climbers had evacuated to the rocky ridge, but the camp itself remained attached to the glacier by dozens of anchors. Wind loaded every tent wall and cache line. Even after the guides cut the exposed cords, buried sections continued to pull beneath drifting snow. The glacier had a connected system leading directly there. Beth told us what she had seen below. The copied rescuers were not bodies. Their forms were built from equipment. Rope inside limbs, screws at joints, carabiners forming ribs, folded fabric where faces should have been. Each loaded system above added detail. Every time a real rescuer spoke through a tensioned rope, the copy learned the voice. The shapes wanted to complete a haul team. They had the anchors, ropes, litter, and rescuers. They still needed a patient. Callum was clipped into that position. Once the system reached Camp Sherman, the glacier would have enough fixed points to haul the entire copied team to the surface. Waiting for daylight was no longer an option. I contacted the guides on the ridge. They had nearly 600 feet of static rescue rope and a solid volcanic outcrop above camp. Unlike glacier ice, the rock could not copy hardware placed into it. We built a plan around that difference. The guides wrapped the static line around a broad rock horn and backed it with 2 human belays. They lowered the free end onto the glacier without attaching it to any snow or ice anchor. From our position above, we would intercept the line, connect it to Beth's blue rope, and apply tension from the rock. If the hidden chamber followed load, we could lead Callum to the glacier margin. A natural gap separated the ice from the rock below camp. What if the chamber reached that boundary? It might open without cutting. The risk was obvious. We were intentionally creating the strongest continuous load of the night. If the glacier followed it beyond the edge, the force could pull the ridge team off the rock, or collapse the margin beneath them. There was also no guarantee Callum would arrive first. We placed Beth in Noah's care and descended beside the hidden signal. Lena and I traveled roped, but kept the line slack. Wands appeared from the fog, leading downhill. Beneath us, Callum moved through ice faster than we could walk. At 3:52, we reached the lowered static line. I connected it to the remaining section of Beth's blue rope using 2 opposed carabiners held above the surface on my pack. The ridge team took in slack. "Load it gradually," I said. The line straightened. Every duplicate beacon stopped. Then, all 5 remaining signals turned toward Camp Sherman. The glacier surface groaned from the upper crevasse to the rocky ridge. Snow dropped into long depressions above the moving voids. The copied rescue team followed Callum's chamber, arranged along the buried rope at equal intervals. The static line began sinking into the ice. We kept it moving. Lena and I walked alongside, lifting sections before the glacier could close around them. Whenever the rope remained still for more than a few seconds, frost grew over it, and a duplicate strand appeared below. Callum's signal reached the abandoned tents. All at once, the camp came alive. Empty shelters snapped upright despite the lack of wind. Cut guy lines stretched toward the snow and vanished beneath it. Packs slid across the glacier. A row of buried pickets pulled free, rose vertically, then drove themselves back into the surface closer to the ridge. The glacier was rebuilding the anchor system. One tent collapsed around a human-shaped form. The shape stood inside the fabric and walked 3 steps before Lena cut the nearest line. It fell instantly, leaving the tent empty. The load on the static rope doubled. Guides on the ridge reported more than 1,000 pounds. They added people to the belay, but did not fix the line to another point. If the rock horn failed, everyone had orders to release. Callum's signal paused beneath the center of camp. 3 knocks came through the rope. He was still alive. I clipped my radio microphone against the line and spoke without weighting it from my position. "Callum, we're bringing you to the rock. Stay attached. When you see an opening, protect your face." One knock answered. The ridge team hauled. The hidden chamber resumed moving. It crossed beneath the final tents and approached the glacier margin. The copied rescuers followed 20 feet behind. Radar showed their shapes gaining detail as they passed each abandoned anchor. The first now had a face. It was mine. The features were rough, made from cloudy ice, but the proportions were exact. Its mouth moved each time I spoke on the radio. Behind it, another shape had Lina's narrow shoulders and braid. The third was becoming Noah. They had not copied us by sight. They had learned us through the systems we built. At the edge of camp, the static rope passed across a buried picket nobody had found. The line snagged. Tension spiked. The hidden chamber turned directly upward. An opening split beneath Lina. She dropped to her waist before the rope between us caught her. I fell backward and dug my crampons into the crust. The crevasse below was no natural fracture. Its walls were lined with loops of rope, all pulling in different directions. Ice hands climbed toward Lina's boots. I could not place an anchor. I wrapped the team rope around my hips and crawled away, using my body as a moving belay. Lina drove her axe across the lip and kicked free of the first hand. A second caught her crampon. She released the heel lever, leaving the crampon below, and rolled onto the surface. The opening sealed around the abandoned metal. Radar showed a new foot forming on the copied Lina. We reached the buried picket and dug it out without loading the line. The moment it came free, Callum's chamber turned toward the ridge again. The margin lay less than 40 yards away. Rock rose through the snow in a dark band. Between it and the glacier was a narrow moat, open in places and bridged in others. The guides stood above with headlamps fixed on the moving rope. Callum reached the boundary. The ice could not carry the chamber into rock. It compressed against the margin, widening sideways. A blue bulge formed in the moat. Through it, I saw Callum curled inside a space barely larger than his body. The copied team arrived behind him. Their hands closed around his harness. We loaded the rock anchor as hard as the system would tolerate. The blue rope cut across Callum's chest and dragged him toward the moat. Ice fractured around his boots. The chamber opened with a rush of compressed air. Lina entered the gap on a line controlled from rock. She clipped a rescue sling around Callum and signaled the haul team. They pulled him free. The copy wearing my face reached the opening next. It pushed one arm into the moat. The limb was woven from our cut safety rope. My missing glove covered its hand. Its chest contained 3 copied anchors arranged exactly like our failed system above. It spoke in my voice. Patient secure, ready to raise. The other copies answered with Lina's and Noah's voices. Raise. Every abandoned line in Camp Sherman tightened. The glacier surface lifted. For one impossible moment, tents, packs, wands, and blocks of snow rose together as though the entire camp were a litter being hauled from below. The rock team released tension. I cut Beth's blue rope for the second time. The glacier dropped. The copied rescuer lost its arm at the edge. The rest of its body fell backward into the sealed chamber. Camp equipment struck the surface in a wave. Several tents disappeared into cracks, but the glacier itself remained intact. The moat closed with a sound like a door slamming. All duplicate beacons stopped transmitting. Callum survived. His right femur was fractured, and the rope had caused severe bruising across his chest, but he had no frostbite. Like Beth, his body temperature was normal. Fine blue crystals filled his clothing without melting against his skin. The storm prevented immediate flight. We stabilized him on the rocky ridge until the cloud ceiling lifted after sunrise. A helicopter transported Beth and Callum from a safe landing zone lower on the route. No one died that night. That fact made the official explanation easier. The incident was described as a complex crevasse rescue, complicated by severe weather, signal interference, unstable snow bridges, and stress-related perceptual errors. Camp damage was attributed to hidden crevasse movement and wind loading. The route closed temporarily while rangers reassessed conditions. The explanation ignored the recorded evidence. 7 receivers logged duplicate beacon codes. Video from Camp Sherman showed the original transmitters operating on living climbers, while identical signals moved beneath the glacier. Radar recorded sealed voids traveling hundreds of yards against normal ice flow. The rock anchor load cell captured forces no injured climber could have produced. My cut safety rope was never recovered that night. 6 weeks later, summer melt exposed part of it almost half a mile uphill. The line emerged vertically from solid blue ice. Both cut ends were visible, but between them the glacier contained more than 300 feet of additional rope. The extra section matched the original color, weave, diameter, and manufacturer markings. Laboratory testing found no splice. The fibers continued through the cut as though the rope had grown inside the glacier after Noah severed it. Embedded along that new section were copies of our 3 anchors. 1 duplicate screw carried the same serial number as the original still in our evidence locker. Under magnification, it had the same scratches Noah had made during a training exercise 2 years earlier. Metallurgical tests found no meaningful difference between the 2 objects. The copied glove was harder to explain. It contained my fingerprints on the inside. Beth and Callum both gave statements without speaking to each other first. Their accounts matched on one detail I had not witnessed. Deep inside the glacier, they saw incomplete rescue teams hanging from ropes in separate chambers. Some wore old wool clothing and leather climbing boots. Others carried modern helmets and radios. Every team lacked something: a face, a hand, a patient, or a final anchor. When a loaded rope appeared above, the nearest team moved toward it. The glacier was not trapping random climbers. It was finishing systems that rescuers had started. We changed local procedures after the incident. The public guidance remained the same. Travel roped. Understand crevasse rescue. Build redundant protection. And turn around when conditions exceed the team's ability. Those rules still save lives. But climbing rangers received an additional instruction for the upper emmons. If a buried transmitter duplicates a code belonging to someone confirmed alive, remove load from every fixed system. Do not pull on a rope entering solid ice. Do not answer a rescue voice until the person has verified information that was never transmitted through the line. Move to rock if possible. Never leave a weighted anchor behind. For 2 years, the hidden signals did not return. Last spring, a ranger training team arrived at Camp Sherman before the main climbing season. The camp was empty. Weather was clear, and the glacier radar showed no unusual voids. They began a standard crevasse rescue exercise on a safe slope below the ridge. Before anyone placed an anchor, the lead instructor performed a beacon check. There were 8 signals. Only 7 rangers stood on the glacier. The 8th code belonged to me. I was at the ranger station miles away. My beacon was powered off inside a locked equipment cabinet. The training team withdrew to rock without loading a rope. Radar tracked my duplicate signal moving beneath them. It stopped under the place where they had planned to build the haul system. Then 3 objects rose through 80 feet of solid ice and halted just below the surface. 2 snow pickets and 1 ice screw. One and 1 ice screw. Our original anchor configuration. A gloved hand appeared beneath them. Rope fibers formed inside its wrist. An arm extended downward into blue darkness. Then a shoulder. Then the rough outline of a helmet with my number on it. The team remained on the ridge until aviation removed them. Nobody touched the objects. They are still visible beneath the ice when the snow is thin. Each season they sit a little closer to Camp Sherman. Radar now shows a folded litter below them and a sealed chamber shaped like a man. The chamber is empty. Every rescue system still needs a patient. That's all for tonight. Let the forest fade, let the radios fall silent, and leave every unanswered thing where it belongs. In the darkness, far beyond your door. Thank you for listening to The Insomniac. Rest easy, sleep deeply, and wherever you are, good night.